Season 5, Episode 1. 2 Tonys.
Got yourself a gun. Got yourself a gun.
I played the intro bit twice. You know why? Because there's 2 Tonys. We're fresh off the heels of a hot divorce as we're given multiple depressing shots of the Soprano household, including one lingering shot of the infamous bird feeder. And the show lets us know that things are going to be a little different this season, as we are given the usual shot of Tony walking outside to grab his newspaper. Instead, one of Meadow running it over with her car before picking up AJ. Soon after, we learn of another development that'll be driving most of the story this season, that being the release of multiple Soprano family associates out of prison, including former Lupertazzi family captain Phil Leotardo, former consigliere Angelo Gareppe, Fish Lamanna, the guy whose card game Tony and Jackie Aprile stole from, as mentioned by Richie Aprile and Ralphie, and most notably Anthony Blundetto, which Tony is very happy about, mentioning how much he misses him.
Oh, my ears!
Carm tells AJ to pull his weight, playfully saying it's nice to have a man help around the house, as AJ says she should have thought of that before kicking Tony out of the house. And Carmela contemplates murdering her son before telling him to get the vacuum. Carm works on the dishes before being hit with some unbearable news.
Mommy, help! Mommy!
Oh my god, dude. Carm swoops in to save her son by banging on pots and pans while AJ cries like a baby. To be completely fair to AJ, if you were walking around your backyard at night and you saw a giant black bear wandering around, you'd probably start blubbering like an infant too. I don't know if I'd start saying mommy though. Now that's embarrassing. Ah, mommy! Tony enjoys the bachelor life, while Animal Control says that the bear's long gone by now, noting that the birdseed was what probably attracted the bear in the first place, and that Carm should ask Tony to put it somewhere else, which Carm unhappily agrees with. I swear, there was a curse attached to that bird feeder. Whenever it's brought up in the story, it's never for any good reason. It brings in bears and it causes divorces. Tony and Valentina watch television, and she tries to act lovey-dovey to Tony while Tony ignores her. Much too invested in the movie The Prince of Tides, a movie that features Barbara Streisand playing the role of a psychiatrist. Not so coincidentally enough later, Melfi receives a large bouquet of flowers and a giant thing of laundry detergent, with the attached note of the gift reading, "Thinking of you, your Prince of Tide." Wow. Paulie and Chris recall the Pine Barren story to the crew at the Bing, and Chris says that none of that would have happened if Paulie didn't overreact initially by fighting the Russian at his place, a line which offends Paulie even though Chris is completely right. The funny haha recollection of the event quickly devolves into Chris and Paulie nearly fighting each other, and Tony later calls Melfi, asking how she liked the flowers, as Melfi knows that it's been a hot second since their last encounter.
And how is life?
Good, good.
Tony mentions his separation from Carmela before asking Melfi out to dinner, but Melfi denies this due to their previous clinical relationship, and Tony does some last-minute flirting before hanging up the phone. AJ channels his inner Dave Grohl upstairs while Carm notices that the goddamn bear is still wandering around outside, and calls Animal Control while Tony walks inside, surprised about the bear while Carm warns the Kusamanos. Tony asks why she didn't call him about this earlier, but Carm says she didn't need to since Animal Control came, as Animal Control comes once more, informing Tony and Carm that, since the bear hasn't threatened anybody, they don't have any grounds to take action against it. And Tony catches Carm and the Animal Control guy exchanging very interesting glances. Tony goes, "Yeah, that guy's totally gay, am I right?" and later drinks orange juice straight out of the carton, strangely not caring that it's only home style and not the one with Shum Pope. Holy shit, it's vitamin water. This is the greatest show ever. Tony says he's nervous about the bear coming back to the house while he's gone, and gives Carm some extra money on top of their agreed sum for her and AJ to stay at a hotel. But Carm says that AJ's an asshole and criticizes Tony for spoiling him with an expensive drum set while ignoring other needs like a tutor for AJ and a new coffee maker.
He's a college kid, Tony. He's not set up for that. You worried he's gonna soak you for an extra pencil?
Oh, rim shot!
Yep, I'm using that clip. The two start having a divorced couple caliber argument as the subject suddenly switches to Furio, with Tony saying that Furio is a dead man should he ever show up again. Tony leaves a voicemail to Melfi saying he wants to start up therapy again as Bobby and Junior have lunch with Feech Lamanna, and Tony comes by to visit as Feech details his insane psychopathic tendencies with a story of how he beat the shit out of the toughest guy he could find his first day in prison. Feech makes a request to get back in the game, which Tony says he can as long as he doesn't start fucking around. And the guys mention the bear up at Tony's place and how concerning it is, with Tony asking how the hell everyone knows this and saying that he doesn't need to do anything about it since him and Carm are divorced. Adriana and
Christopher
prepare for a dinner night with some of the crew, and Chris mooches off of Adriana's cash as Adriana says he should tell Paulie to start paying the bill instead of himself for once, saying that his previous responsibilities as a captain should come with the benefits too. Tony changes his mind after earlier going who cares about the bear and sends some bear care in the form of Benny Fazio to look over the place, and Silvio Silvio, Chris, Paulie, and others have a nice dinner, though not so nice for Chris, as he briefly talks sass to Paulie before receiving a hefty bill to pay for. He tries passing the bill off to Paulie before Paulie passes it over to Chris, before Chris passes it over to Paulie, before Paulie passes it over to Chris, before Chris passes it over to Paulie. And Paulie says, fuck it, I'll pay for it, as Chris insists on paying the bill before Paulie insists on paying the bill before Chris. Paulie and Chris's feud continues escalating as Paulie confronts him the next day to choke up $860 for the bill. And Carmine starts choking up food during dinner and dies. Johnny informs little Carmine that his father has had a stroke, and little Carmine rushes out of the pool while Johnny and Tony talk at the hospital, with Johnny saying that he's still pissed that Tony wouldn't let him go through with a hit on Carmine. And Melfi and Tony decide to cut their losses and play a game of Battleship together. Just kidding. Melfi wakes up from that particularly horny dream as the show cuts to Melfi accepting Tony back into her sessions. However, rather than getting our first therapy session of the season, we're instead treated to Tony desperately trying to convince Melfi that they should get together. Tony says that Melfi can be honest with him if there's something about Tony that she doesn't like. And Melfi admits that she likes Tony but remains professional and says that her job has trained her to assume that these feelings Tony's describing are nothing more than a deep-rooted urge to come back to therapy. Tony brushes this off and says that he wants Melfi for Melfi, not just for the advice she gives him. And Melfi says that Tony's simply projecting these qualities onto her before Tony dives in for a kiss, which lasts for a hot second. Melfi quietly tells Tony not to do that again before Tony says that there are two Tonys inside of him, and that he wants to show Melfi the other one before leaving her office. Later, Melfi describes her complicated feelings to Elliot, saying that her initial attraction toward Tony deteriorated as she learned more about Tony and his life, as Elliot points out that she still kept him as a patient for years. And Elliot says that Tony's a sociopath, and then the only thing he wants from Melfi now is games of Battleship. He claims that Melfi's worried as to how Tony will handle being rejected by her, as the show cuts to Tony telling Chris to keep paying for dinners, saying that it's tradition and that he had to pay for dinners when he was in Chris's position. The crew has fun at dinner while Chris slouches over knowing how much he's gonna have to fork over for this. And Paulie rubs dirt in the wound and offers dessert to the table, as well as delivers a bottle of champagne to a table of random ladies.
Enjoy it, girls. I've been enjoying looking at you the whole night.
Get some fucking glasses.
Tony talks to Silvio about his frustrations with his relationship with Melfi, though obviously pretending like it's someone else. And Chris receives the bill for the dinner, with Paulie rubbing it in and talking about how positively wonderful tonight was. Chris yells at Paulie to stop rage baiting him, and how Paulie intentionally made everyone get expensive shit to up the bill. And the two nearly fight again before the waiter starts hounding Chris for a bigger tip, which Chris rejects.
Yeah, right. Go piss it away at blackjack, fucking asshole.
Oh!
What do you gotta say now? Still going, this asshole.
Paulie and Chris bond over a nice little murder before rushing the hell out of there. And Johnny and Ginny meet little Carmine in the hospital, who's upset for very obvious reasons. The next day, Paulie and Chris finally bury the hatchet between each other, saying they've got better things to do than fight each other and that someone could have gotten killed because of them. Tony later meets Melfi at a group session and once again tries to get something going between the two of them, offering her tickets to Bermuda for a little romantic getaway. But Melfi resists the temptation and once again puts her foot down, rejecting Tony's advances for good and asking him to respect her decision. Tony demands to know exactly why Melfi won't go out with him, and Melfi says that she believes her and Tony's values are different, saying that Tony isn't respectful of people, lies frequently, and uses force to get what he wants. And Tony takes this criticism in stride.
You fucking
Tony fools around back to the house pouting like a child and takes Benny's place for bear guarding duty, looking arguably the coolest he ever has in the show as we fade to black, ending the episode. What a great season opener. One aspect of the later seasons of The Sopranos that I really enjoy compared to the older ones are how gray and drab the lighting and the color scheme becomes, representing the inevitable decay of our cast of characters as the show progresses. It looks really nice and really cements the look and feel of The Sopranos going forward. Compare this episode to the pilot episode, it's insane how much The Sopranos has progressed stylistically. Paulie and Chris's relationship hits another road bump in this episode, making for a very entertaining B-plot. Paulie is such an ass. I love when he's rubbing Chris having to pay the bill in his face before getting riled up at Chris the moment he starts talking back to Paulie. And I enjoy the fact that literally nothing good ever happens anytime the Pine Barrens story is brought up between Chris and Paulie.
Yeah, remember last winter in the woods with the Russian guy?
I also like the detail that Chris is reading a biography about Bill W., the guy who co-founded Alcoholics Anonymous. Paulie and Chris's relationship isn't the only one getting tested, however. The exploration of Tony's feelings of love and attraction prevalent throughout season 4 bleeds over into this episode, as Tony tries his damnedest to get into Melfi's pants by any means necessary, which makes for a very enthralling going back and forth between the two of them. Their relationship is almost like Carm and Furio's in a way, where they both know deep down that they have feelings for one another, while also knowing deep down that those feelings can't truly be reciprocated between each other due to numerous conflicting circumstances. It's probably why Tony got so enraged in their last scene together in this episode. He knows that something's there, it's just that Melfi is refusing to budge and is instead doing what's best for her and Tony. What an asshole. Melfi's personal feelings for Tony that have been hinted at and implied throughout the show were essentially confirmed in this episode via the battleship dream sequence, which probably doesn't need much analysis to get the gist of, making the big scene with her and Tony in this episode all the more interesting as she tries to fight off her personal feelings and remain professional. To close off this season opener, I am putting this episode right near the tippy top of A tier. Season 5, Episode 2, Rat Pack. A couple of random guys watch Jack Masserone walk through the pouring rain into a restaurant to meet Tony, handing over a painting of the Rat Pack, a famous collection of singers from back in the 40s and 50s that included people like Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. Jack tries to get some business talk going while Tony ignores it, and a police officer checks in on the random guys to make sure that they aren't like planning a murder or something. Tony and Jack continue talking as Tony admires the Rat Pack painting. Meanwhile, the FBI guys press Adriana for information regarding a recent murder, and one of the guys bum rushes out of the car to the police station the instant Adriana confirms the prime suspect. Ray Curto helps transcribe a wiretap recording of Tony Soprano with Harrison Grasso, the guy who Tony told to suck his dick in Italian back in the first season. And Deb and Sanseverino watch security footage of the Crazy Horse, while various other FBI guys listen to a recording of the conversation we heard with Jack and Tony, revealing Jack Masserone to be an FBI informant. Tony once again meets with Feach at Junior's place, where they discuss finally meeting up with Tony's cousin Anthony Blundetto. As the previous episode's title foreshadowed, there are going to be two different Tonys walking around in this show, so I'm going to be calling this one Tony and this one Tony B. Tony flexes the Motorola he's gonna give to Tony B as Junior obsesses over eggs and having Bobby cook them eggs, getting so deep into it that he accidentally refers to Tony B as Tony Egg.
You and Tony Egg again.
Tony Egg, Tony B.
Immediately after this funny moment, however, Bobby receives a call and finds out that Carmine just died for real and is never coming back. Junior rambles about unrelated shit before the show cuts to Carmine's funeral, as little Carmine stares unhappily at all of the mob guys telling jokes and being happy while Carmine's body lay inches away from them. We're introduced to Lorraine, a character we'll be seeing more of later, and Johnny and little Carmine respect Carmine's legacy by loudly arguing 4 feet away from his casket. Tony watches Band of Brothers and gets emotional. Great show, by the way. I had to watch it for history class back in high school. While Adriana comforts her insecure friend Tina at the club, who implies to Adriana that she's not paying for her mink coat legally. The two head back to their double date as everyone has drinky drinks instead of Christopher for obvious reasons, which Chris gets teased for. Chris later complains about the constant temptations being shoved in his face and also calls Tina a for some reason. And Tony goes over to his Auntie Quinn's house the next day, where the show finally properly introduces us to Tony B, played by Steve Buscemi, who, fun fact, directed the Pine Barrens episode back in season 3. He was also the one who threw the steak at Tony's head for that one scene where the steak was thrown at Tony's head. Tony and Tony hug each other after 15 years of being apart. And Tony brings Tony B over to a surprise party at Vesuvio, where Artie walks over and happily greets Tony B while awkwardly glancing over at Tony and walking away. Still not exactly over the whole French loan thing from last season. That uncomfortable encounter is quickly followed up by an even more uncomfortable encounter as Carm greets Tony B as well, with the three sitting in awkward silence. The tension is seemingly broken once Janice steals Tony B to meet her family until it becomes fully repaired the moment Bobby Jr. asks why he's never even heard of Tony B up to this point, which Tony B has no answer to. Tony B gets a drink from the bar after realizing that the entire family kind of sucks now as Tony makes a toasty to Tony B, reflecting on fond childhood memories as well as how close the two were to each other. And everyone gives Tony B a nice welcome home while cheap noisemaker sound effects play in the background. Tony and Tony walk to the Bing as Tony B laments that his daughter Kelly couldn't be at the party, briefly mentioning the event that landed him in prison in the first place that we won't be getting the nitty-gritty details of until much later this season. At the Bing, we get a reappearance of Sun Tzu as Paulie brings up a quote of his.
It's like Sun Tzu says, a good commander is benevolent and unconcerned with fame.
What?
Zoo.
Sun Tzu, you fucking ass kid.
Tony notices Tony B accepting an envelope of cash from Feach, and Johnny and Tony piss and shit while discussing Jack Masserone, as well as Johnny and little Carmine's cat fight at Carmine's funeral. Tony B says to Tony,
"Boy, are you fat,"
which secretly pisses off Tony as Tony tries to play it off like everything's fine and dandy. And the next morning, Tony and Tony meet at a diner, where Tony B talks about how he's close to becoming a licensed massage therapist. He tells Tony that he doesn't want to get back into the game just yet and that he needs regular work. And later that night, Carm kicks AJ out of the theater room for Mob Wife movie night. The movie of the night being Citizen Kane, widely considered one of the greatest films of all time ever.
The cinematography, music, and Oscar-winning screenplay by Wells and Herman J. something are all first rate.
Herman J. something? I'm looking this up. Yeah, I don't know how to say that either. The Mob Wives give the film 2 stars on Letterboxd and briefly discuss it before moving on to gossip talk, with Adriana unable to join the conversation as Carm talks about her divorce and how she's entitled to half of Tony's everything. Adriana later discusses the movie night with Sanseverino and how everyone was talking about their miserable marriages, but Sanseverino coldly brushes off these personal details and sticks to obtaining information. Adriana says that she feels terrible about having to snitch all the time while Tony B walks into the pork store, wasting no time roasting everybody at the table.
You know you can't pay us in napkins.
You gotta let that dry before you put on a second coat?
You're gonna deal those? They're not candy bars. You can let some of them go.
The busting of the balls ends the moment Paulie asks what the hell Tony B brought in with him, which Tony B says is a massage chair, an item that's very quickly put to good use. Tony hilariously walks into the middle of the carnage as everyone tells Tony that he's got to give Tony B a try, but Tony instead forces Tony B to have a talk with him outside, angrily telling Tony B to stop hurting his feelings with stuff like the "boy are you fat" thing, which Tony B flatly accepts. Adriana does money stuff with a crazy horse while Tina flirts with Chris right in front of Adriana, an action made 10 times worse by the fact that Chris doesn't deny this and instead plays along with her while Adriana stands literal actual centimeters away from the two of them. Tony talks about how awesome it is to be single as Patsy informs Tony that Jack Masserone is working with the feds, mentioning that one of his cop buddies spotted 2 suspicious FBI looking dudes in a car, the same ones we saw earlier this episode. Tony talks about how fucked they'd be if Jack Masserone flipped before saying that he got a pretty sweet painting from him though, and says that he wants to arrange a personal meeting with the guy, saying that his father was good at vibing people out and that surely those skills should be passed over to him. Carm complains to Tony about him taking the home theater components out of the house before Tony meets with Jack, putting up one of the worst "are you wearing a wire" efforts in Sopranos history.
My old man was very good at vibing people out, too. Masserone's up to something? I'll pick it up. We couldn't tell shit.
Tony hilariously fixates on the fact that Jack said Tony looked like he lost weight, and Chris tries recommending Tony B as the guy to take out Jack before Tony gets pissed at Chris and says that Tony B is useless to him. Adriana continues trying to vibe with the Mob Wives and goes out for a smoke break with Rosalie because nicotine is an addictive substance. And Rosalie reveals that Angie Bompancero has been shunned by the rest of the wives due to Big Pussy supposedly disappearing into the witness protection program, a fact that Adriana knows isn't true from her conversation with the FBI guys last season. And Rosalie compares Pussy to Judas, which terrifies Adriana, knowing how much her involvement with the feds would completely jeopardize her relationship with the people around her. Tony has a couple drinky drinks at his mother's place, taking the painting Masserone gave to him and making it the focal point over the fireplace mantle. And Carm talks about how she'd be struggling through her divorce without her friends as Adriana drinks like crazy and begins sobbing uncontrollably. We get this big panning shot of the Mob Wives as Adriana nearly admits that she's an FBI informant, but she catches herself and hurries out of there to fool around back home, not before epic failing in front of everyone and damn near concussing herself. Tony continues staring at the painting before giving Tony B a call, slightly apologizing for getting pissed at him earlier and saying that he can bust his balls when they're not in front of the guys. Tony starts ranting about his divorce before Tony B says that he's got to go to bed, and later, Tony stares at himself in the mirror, silently thinking over the higher than average fat comments he was received in this episode. He ultimately decides that Masserone's gotta go as he throws the painting over a bridge and into the river, and the show cuts to Masserone's dead body lying in the back of a car as the FBI looks over at him in disappointment. Ray Curto complains about not getting enough money to Grasso, while Adriana gives information to Sanseverino. And Adriana decides to take revenge on Tina for trying to steal Chris away from her by reporting the stolen income she's taking to pay for her mink coat and other expenses, making herself feel slightly better over betraying her friends and family as the show fades to black, ending the episode. A pretty good episode. We're finally formally introduced to Tony B, and I think this is a great introductory episode for him. It's strange how Tony B isn't really mentioned that often when viewing wider discussions of The Sopranos, considering how big of a role his character plays in season 5, along with the fact that he's played by Steve Buscemi. We'll go more in depth about this when the time comes, because depending on who you ask, Tony B is either a good character or a missed opportunity to do something greater. I'm getting way too ahead of myself though, so let's stick to the present. One thing that I really enjoy about Tony B's character is his unique dynamic with Tony and how their conflict varies compared to other members of the crew, as can be seen during the moment near the middle of the episode when Tony criticizes Tony B for calling him a fat ass. If it were any other member of the crew, Tony likely would have ripped them a new asshole and went full boss mode while the other guy went, "Yes sir, sorry sir, won't have it again, Tone." But because of Tony B's close relationship with Tony, the back and forth is altered significantly. Tony B remains stone-faced and nowhere near as intimidated as someone else in his position would be, to the point that he practically calls Tony fat again while Tony's telling him to shut up about the fat stuff.
Things have changed around here. I'm the boss of this fucking family.
You're crowding me.
You'll notice that, especially in these later seasons, Tony really just becomes this miserable sack of garbage. That's not to say he wasn't like that before, but he becomes far less likable as the last few seasons of the show progress. And the first real notable moment of this has got to be the aforementioned
Boy, are you fat
incident, along with Masserone mentioning that Tony looks like he's lost weight, which ultimately becomes the deciding factor for Tony as to whether or not Masserone should be killed. Amazingly, this is not the first time that Tony decided to kill someone in his crew over a throwaway remark about his weight.
What are you, a vegetarian? You eat beef and sausage by the fucking carload.
Speaking of Masserone, I really like the last few scenes in this episode when Tony looks at the Rat Pack painting while contemplating whether or not to murder Masserone, with the painting serving as something of a physical representation of Tony's decision. I also enjoyed how this episode explored the conflicting relationship between Adriana, the FBI, and her family, and the tremendous guilt that she feels for betraying the confidences of her friends and family against her will. Drea de Matteo does a really good job playing this character. I don't know how she's able to cry like that like every other episode. I'm giving this episode a light, feathery A tier. Season 5, Episode 3, Where's Johnny? Woke up this morning, got myself. Tony B does some laundry work to bring in some cash, which Tony says he feels bad about, saying that it easily could have been him who was sent away for the hijack instead of Tony B. He mentions that a bunch of guys jumped him and split his head open that night, which is why he wasn't able to join along. Not really a beating, but I like large numbers, so up it goes. Tony B rides along with Feach and talks with him about how he wants to remain a civilian before Feach notices some gardeners working in a neighborhood that belongs to his nephew, Gary LaManna, and deals with the situation with mercy and forgiveness.
How about I fuck off all over your stupid fucking face?
Christ, we're on parole. What the fuck you doing?
We watch Junior's further mental decline as he watches Curb Your Enthusiasm on TV and believes that Larry, David, and Jeff are actually himself and Bobby. And the real Bobby meets with Tony at the Bing, who requests Tony for more work on the streets so he can get some extra cash. Tony says that he depends on Bobby to take care of Junior over at his place, but says that he'll see what he can do. And Paulie arrives at his Aunt Mary's house with Nucci, where Mary reveals that her gardener, Sal Vitro, was recently beat up by some guys in a Cadillac. And Paulie receives a business card from Mary detailing Gary LaManna's gardening service and says he'll see what he can do. Lorraine and their boyfriend Jason head to a bar to make collections as we're finally properly introduced to the previously mentioned Phil Leotardo, who interrupts these collections to slap Lorraine in the face and prepare her execution for kicking up the little Carmine instead of Johnny's sack. And despite her offer to suck everyone's dicks, Phil goes forward with it anyway.
Adios, you fucking skank. Look at this, Joey. Today's a lucky day. Only made it to the R's.
Phil makes one hell of a first impression in his first true appearance, and if he looks familiar to any of you, that's probably because Frank Vincent, the actor for Phil, also played the role of Billy Bats in Goodfellas.
Now go home and get your fucking shine box.
Motherfucking mutt!
Later, Tony and Junior meet with Angelo Gareppe, Lorraine, and Jason to talk about issues with the hierarchy, discussing the fact that Carmine never officially named a successor between little Carmine and Johnny, despite the fact that Johnny is asserting his dominance and acting like he was named the successor. Angelo asks if Tony's got any ideas, as Junior says Tony doesn't have shit since he never became a varsity athlete in high school. And Tony continues talking like nothing happened and pitches the idea of Johnny, little Carmine, and Angelo sharing the role of leader together. Paulie tries to make Sal Vitro feel better after the whole Feach incident, as Sal says that his wife is advising him to go to the cops. But Paulie prevents this by promising to talk with Feach and get his stops back, which Sal is pleased by.
There he is, the king of breadsticks. Get the fuck out of my store!
Just kidding. Paulie has a talk with Feach, attempting to tell Feach to lay off his Sal since he's been working in the neighborhood for years, but Feach brushes this off, essentially saying that he doesn't give a shit what Paulie thinks and tells him to get out of his store. Janice, Tony, and AJ fool around over to Vesuvio as Tony criticizes Janice for not helping take care of Junior with Bobby, and Janice lists a Bible's worth of excuses before making it to the restaurant, where Janice continues rambling and claims that Livia was so miserable because of her husband and children and not because she was the worst person to ever exist. Tony attempts to make things right with Artie as he cooks in the kitchen, offering to make Artie's current living situation better by having him bunk with Tony at Livia's place. And Artie initially passes before Tony asks how long they're gonna hold a grudge for, and Artie eventually agrees to Tony's offer. Tony finally learns not to make business deals with friends before immediately making a business deal with Artie while leaving the restaurant. And the show cuts to Tony literally watching paint dry on TV at Junior's place. At dinner, Bobby asks AJ about school sports as Junior once again pipes in, saying that Tony never had the makings of a varsity athlete, a comment that pisses Tony off as he starts getting weirdly defensive over this remark. He says that Junior's obsessed over this and that Junior's purposefully undermining him, mentioning that Junior once told the girl cousins in the family the same thing when Tony was younger and how it hurt his feelings. And Barbara's family arrives before things get too awkward. The awkwardness is dialed up once again, however, as Barbara's husband starts talking sports, which prompts Junior to mention that Tony never had the makings of a varsity athlete, which prompts Tony to storm out of the house with AJ, saying that he's never coming to Sunday dinner again despite earlier telling Janice that Sunday dinner is very important for the family. Paulie visits Aunt Mary's house again as he notices Sal Vitro out the window, with Mary noting that this is going to be his last time coming over to her house. And Paulie leaves the house while Tony meets with Johnny Sack later that night, where Tony talks to Johnny about the meeting with Angelo and Lorraine, as Johnny notes that Tony once had an affair with Lorraine a long while ago. Johnny is pissed at Tony for legitimizing little Carmine after he went down to Florida for help on the HUD scam debacle. And Tony pitches the three-way split idea brought up at the meeting, an idea that Johnny very loudly declines. The next day, Bobby realizes that Junior is nowhere to be seen, his wallet and watch still in his room while the car is missing. And we find out where he is as we witness Junior stumble into a former Soprano crew hangout asking where Johnny Soprano is, with the people inside telling Junior that it's a church group now and kicking him out of there, prompting Junior to start walking aimlessly on the streets all dementia-like. Bobby tries contacting as many people close to Junior as possible, including pie assault victim Bobby Sanfilippo, and Tommy mentions Junior's weird behavior recently, noting that he was asking for Johnny Soprano and that he thought he saw himself on television. Janice ruins Bobby Jr.'s fun and dumps his chocolate milk in the sink while telling Bobby on the phone that Junior being missing isn't a big deal. But Bobby finally tells Janice off and demands that she help him with the situation, saying that he believes that he loves Junior more than she does. Paulie listens to a Son to Zoo audiobook in his car and notices Jimmy and Gary LaManna doing yard work where Sal used to work, and gets payback for Sal Vitro's beating by knocking Jimmy out and causing Gary to fall to the ground, stealing his cash and forcing him to pay for Sal's hospital bill, on top of kicking 10% of all yard work earnings to Paulie from now on, along with taking his lawnmower for good measure. Tony and Chris prepare for a meeting to hire a new contractor, with Tony warning Chris to keep his mouth shut around Johnny if little Carmine comes up in conversation. And Bobby calls Tony, saying that Junior's been lost for a couple hours now and mentioning that he might be looking for Johnny Soprano. But Tony says Junior can get fucked and tells Bobby that Junior is dead to me. He's D-E-A-D, dead to me. And hangs up. Bobby looks around the house waiting for Janice and the kids to arrive so we can search around town for Junior. And we cut to the meeting, where Johnny laments about how he and little Carmine used to be close. Chris, completely ignoring what Tony said earlier, tries to make Johnny feel better and fails miserably as Johnny throws a temper tantrum and storms out of the meeting. Tony yells at Chris for being an idiot, mentioning that the fallout between Johnny and little Carmine could work to their advantage if they play their cards right. And Adriana talks to San Severino about Chris and Tony's familial relationship, since Tony refers to Chris as his nephew even though Chris is Carmela's cousin, who was first cousin to Chris's dad Dickie Moltisanti, a man who Tony regarded as a big brother, explaining Tony and Chris's close relationship. Junior stares at this big Coke bottle in the sky as this homeless lady sits next to him and tries to get some hot battleship going. But Junior's dementia takes a back seat for a moment as he realizes he forgot his car back at the church and starts waddling away. He wanders around late into the night and trips over a bunch of garbage, grabbing the attention of a cop car, and Junior reluctantly identifies himself as the cops take him back home. Junior claims to Janice that his car was stolen as the cops leave the place, and lies to Janice that he wasn't trying to search for Johnny Soprano before going pee-pee. Tony enjoys a bottle of Schrader Brow as Janice and Bobby arrive at his place, informing him of Junior looking for Johnny Soprano and that he more than likely has Alzheimer's. However, Tony keeps being petty and continues insisting that Junior is dead to him, he's D-E-A-D dead to him. And Artie awkwardly listens in from the kitchen as Tony and Janice begin arguing with each other, with Janice criticizing Tony's current family predicament as Tony claps back by criticizing Janice's cluttered love life as well as her entire life in general, mentioning that she ran away from home at 18 and left 16-year-old Tony with Livia.
Free spirit Janice, rebel without a cause. Well, I sit here mired in her bullshit, trying to be a good son while you're off dropping acid and blowing roadies.
Roadies?
Oh, you don't want to know.
Luckily, the argument blows over very quickly and nobody gets hurt.
Fucking piece of shit!
The next day, Tony settles the beef between Feach and Paulie and splits the neighborhood between Paulie and Feach's guys. And he later runs into Dr. Harry Weiner while playing golf, the guy who will be treating Junior for his memory issues, specifically infarcts, or death of a tissue resulting from a failure of blood supply, commonly due to obstruction of a blood vessel by a blood clot or narrowing of the blood vessel channel, more than likely a side effect from falling down the stairs after being knocked over by a boom mic. Tony realizes that these infarcts are likely the reason for Junior's shitty attitude recently, as the doctor says that they can cause a patient to constantly repeat certain phrases frequently. After golf, we get one of the best scenes from the episode, as Tony sits down with Junior to watch television and talk with him. He tells Junior that he talked with Junior's doctor earlier, as Junior mistakenly asked if it was Kennedy, the cancer doctor that Junior wouldn't shut up about back in season 3. And Junior mentions that Feach came over earlier and was bitching about the compromise between him and Paulie, claiming that he's still the boss of this family despite that not being the case since like the 3rd episode of season 1. Tony confronts Junior about the frequent varsity athlete comments, and while he acknowledges that Junior probably doesn't have much control over this, he asks why the phrase that Junior repeats over and over has to be something mean instead of nice. And Junior ignores Tony and continues watching the Prairie Dog documentary on TV before Tony asks Junior a pretty heartbreaking question.
I mean, don't you love me?
Junior holds back tears, unable to look Tony in the eyes. The episode draws to a close. A great emotional end to what is an overall pretty good episode. As you all have likely already realized, the varsity athlete bit that was brought up all the way back in the pilot episode finally comes into play in this episode. And the reason for its inclusion is sadly more tragic than you'd assume, even if the initial moments were really fucking funny. This is another iconic Sopranos moment that I have seen countless times quoted in my comment section and on Twitter. Go follow my Twitter, by the way. I want 10k followers by the end of the month. Better get a move on. While I really enjoyed the family stuff in this episode, particularly the argument between Janice and Tony along with Junior and Tony's last scene in this episode, everything else about this episode was alright. I feel like they could have done a lot more with Junior wandering around New Jersey on his lonesome. We could have had something akin to Pine Barrens all over again, but it wasn't meant to be. I like the stuff with Paulie and Feach getting pissy with each other, and Junior confusing himself with Larry David on television is perhaps one of Junior's finest moments. Overall, I'm feeling a nice beat here for this episode. Season 5, Episode 4. All Happy Families. I made it green this time. The episode opens up on AJ fooling around in the driveway while Tony B hangs out by the pool with his twin boys, with Tony complaining about the fact that he can't find a DeWalt power tool, likely forgetting about the fact that he gave one to cousin Brian last season. However, surprisingly enough, Tony actually remembers that he loaned the power drill to Brian last season, though completely forgets about the fact that he did that to cover up a lie and pretends to have indigestion to quickly change the subject. Carm brings up a parent-teacher conference with AJ's college advisor to discuss AJ's shitty grades and blames Tony for spoiling AJ with Nets games and drum sets instead of forcing him to crack the books. But Tony thinks this conversation sucks and walks out of the kitchen while Lorraine gets chased butt-ass naked around the house by Phil Leotardo's guys for continuing not to kick out to Johnny's sack.
You were warned, Lorraine. The money goes up to John.
Little Carmine later becomes upset once he finds out about Lorraine and Jason's deaths, with Rusty saying this is more than likely the work of Johnny Sack as a warning to the other captains. And Feach joins the crew at a meeting at the Crazy Horse to discuss Johnny and Little Carmine's conflict, as well as comment on how hot Adriana is, which doesn't make Chris necessarily happy, even though he was hitting on Adriana's friend like 2 episodes ago. They briefly discuss Tony and Jackie Aprile Sr. taking down Feach's card game all those years ago, before Tony kicks several of the guys out to discuss business with Feach, with Feach requesting that he run the executive game again, which Tony turns down, though he gives him 20% of the earnings on the grounds that he rents the house from Tony, which Feach is very thankful for. Silvio tells Tony, once Feach leaves the club obviously, that Feach is an egomaniac, but Tony tells Silvio that it's probably fine, while Carm tells AJ that he can't go to a concert with his friends due to the fact that he sucks at school. Tony B and the guys play cards while Feach continues yapping on about stories from 30 years ago. And Tony says hello to everyone at the table as Feach gets pissed at Tony for interrupting his 3-hour monologue, prompting Tony to break Feach's balls a bit and make everyone laugh, which Feach pretends to laugh at while secretly becoming extremely angry. Mr. Wegler talks to Adam Driver before speaking with Tony, AJ, and Carmela, where Mr. Wegler confirms the fact that AJ's grades suck ass. Tony brings up the fact that one of AJ's previous schools thought that he had ADD, a fact that AJ finds very interesting, and AJ gets kicked out before they discuss AJ's test results from his doctor, saying that things seem overall fine with AJ despite the recent divorce. Mr. Wegler says his grades still suck though, and recommends that AJ see a psychologist, but Tony says people use therapy as a crutch, once again asking whatever happened to Gary Cooper, the strong silent type. And Carm also says that psychology didn't work the last time they tried it on one of their kids. She also calls AJ lazy as if she and Tony aren't the reason he acts this way. And Melfi notices a big treasure chest of goodies in her waiting room, immediately recognizing it as the work of Tony. AJ listens to his tutor for 3 seconds before getting distracted by Tony getting him an Xterra, but Tony tells him that he can't have it until he maintains a C average, and AJ calls Carmela a Carm talks about how much of a hateful bitch AJ's being, lamenting the fact that AJ used to be nicer as a toddler before forcing Tony to pay for a new sound system for the media room since he stole the last one. Tony sarcastically asks if Mob Wife movie night is still going on as Carm clips back that she at least has friends, saying that Tony's only surrounded by a bunch of kiss asses vying for his approval. Melfi reads out the letter from the basket that Tony gave her to Elliot, semi-apologizing to her for calling her a through numerous grammatical errors.
And I apologize for my use of foul language. foul with a W.
Mr. Wegler later calls Carm, saying that he has some ideas to help AJ and proposes meeting with her over lunch, winky wink. And she later tries sparking a conversation with AJ over dinner about drums and the Beatles, which doesn't go well as AJ fucks off back upstairs. Back in the game, Tony puts what Carmela said earlier about his friends only being flunkies to the test, telling one of his lamest jokes to date as everyone at the table starts laughing like it's the funniest shit ever, resulting in what is simultaneously one of the funniest and most surreal scenes ever as Tony realizes just how spot on Carmela's assessment was. Carm later goes up to AJ's room and allows him to go to the concert with his friends under the condition that he sleeps at Meadows' apartment and arrives home early the next day, which AJ agrees to as we watch a boatload of cars being hijacked at Dr. Free the penis doctor's daughter's wedding. AJ decides not to follow any of that lame mom shit and tells Meadow that he's gonna stay with friends instead of going to Meadows' place, which Meadow allows as she later lies to Carmela, saying that AJ passed out at her place after drinking a bunch. AJ gets blasted with his friends in this dingy hotel room while Dr. Free the penis doctor informs Tony of the robbery, noting that a lot of really expensive and exclusive cars were jacked off the property as Tony says that he'll see what he can do. We cut to the next day as Carm attempts to contact a completely hungover AJ, who realizes that his face got crazy glue the night before. Once he gets his face off the carpet though, he realizes pretty quickly that the glue is the least of his problems.
Oh,
Carmela starts freaking the fuck out over AJ's whereabouts until she overhears the door open and runs over to it like Woody from Toy Story. And Carm calls AJ a liar before nearly breaking her damn kneecap as AJ rushes to his room. Later, AJ notices Tony angrily entering the house and tries to cover his ass by taking out the trash in a goody gumdrops mood. And Tony notices that something's a little off with his face, like AJ got a pimple and not that his eyebrows were shaved off. AJ admits to Tony that he told Carm to fuck herself. And Tony is initially pissed, saying that AJ's never driving the Xterra again and asking AJ for the truth. And AJ lies by saying that he couldn't make it to Meadows and that the hotel was just too convenient of an option. Tony believes that the eyebrow shaving has something to do with poppers and weird battle shit before AJ lies and says that he and his friends only had a couple of beers. Tony, knowing full well how much AJ has lied in the past, decides it to be a great idea to take him at his word and tells Carmela that it was only a couple of beers and that his punishment shouldn't be too severe. And Carm chastises the both of them, telling AJ that he can live with Tony if he wants. Tony and Carm have an emergency meeting as Carm blames herself for this, saying that she knew letting him go out was a bad idea, but that she wanted to seem cooler than Tony in his eyes. And Tony tries saying that none of this is a big deal before Carm insists that he take AJ to live with him. AJ is finally brutally punished for his behavior by eating pizza and watching The Honeymooners, and the next day, Feach has a seat with Tony, who scolds Feach for stealing the cars from Freed's daughter's wedding due to his close friendship with the crew. We get another shining example of the old generation clashing with the new as Feach asks what the big deal is, saying that Freed is in the game, which makes him susceptible to hits like this, and reveals that he got some good money selling the cars to Johnny Sack, and Tony continues ripping Feach a new asshole until Feach pushes him over the line by pulling the well back in my day card.
In my day. And that's another thing. I don't want to hear no more about how it was in your day. You just keep your antidotes to local color, like Dynaflows or McGuire sisters or shit like that. Otherwise, shut the fuck up!
Feach flatly apologizes for his behavior as Tony silently recalls the phony laughter from earlier, realizing that the only person who wasn't laughing at his joke was Feach. And Tony gives Feach a hug before he leaves, with Tony saying that he doesn't want a repeat of the Richie April situation, and tells Silvio that they need to nip Feach in the bud before he goes off and does something like selling blow-along garbage routes despite being told not to. Benny and Chris stop over at Feach's place and ask if they can use his garage to store a truck full of flat-screen TVs, and Feach says he will for $2K, which Benny and Chris agree to. Carm and Mr. Wegler go out for dinner and discuss plans for AJ as well as current Soprano family affairs. Mr. Wegler recommends the book Madame Bovary to Carm while Feach gets a random inspection by a parole officer in this really tense scene. And the officer looks out the window and asks Feach to open up his garage, with Feach wearing the most "I am so fucked" expression in history. This pretty scary scene is followed up by this really funny scene as Artie shits his pants with all the windows down. And the guys discuss the difference between a hot box and a Dutch oven before Tony tells AJ to do his Spanish homework now. And AJ and Tony stare at each other for a moment before AJ listens to Tony and heads upstairs. We get this really somber moment where Feach is taken back to jail, staring out the window as the bus drives past iconic New Jersey locations like Home Depot. And Silvio gives Tony the news about Feach's departure, with Tony repeating the same popularity contest line that he gave Carmela earlier this episode.
What do I give a shit if they're scared or whatever? I'm running a fucking business, not a popularity contest.
Christopher agrees, by the way.
Well, that's nice that he agrees. I'm not running a fucking popularity contest.
I like how much the context of this line changes between both times Tony says this. The first time he says it, it's like he's trying to defend himself and his crew, but the second time, it feels more like bitter acceptance. If he's gonna be surrounded by ass munches, then he might as well get rid of the one guy who's not eating. What a wonderful metaphor. I should get a Pulitzer. The episode ends with Carmela carrying groceries into the house. And we get this out-of-nowhere gut punch from the shows. We get a flashback to a young AJ riding down the driveway in a trike while Carmela calls out his name, calling back to the beginning of the episode where AJ rode the car back and forth on the driveway. And Carmela walks inside, realizing how alone she is as the show fades to black, ending the episode. A very, very good episode. I forget just how brief Feature LaManna is in the show for. I could have sworn that he had a much bigger role in season 5. Nevertheless, his run during the season was very entertaining to watch, and that's in big part to the legendary Robert Loggia. His stubborn, cantankerous performance adds so much to this already great character and his lore. It makes you wonder how someone as ruthless as Feach was in his prime. Everything else about this episode, especially the plotline with AJ and his parents, was great as well. This episode gives us a wonderful glimpse into Tony and Carm's god-awful parenting over AJ, as they essentially just give him whatever he wants while refusing to take any initiative themselves when it comes to punishing him and teaching him what's right and wrong. Failing grades in school? Okay, here's a sweet fucking X-Terror that you can have if you reach the bare minimum. Lying to your mother and getting butt-fuck wasted? No biggie, we can brush that one off. Here, go over to your dad's house so you can continue partying. Instead of punishing AJ for his blatant misbehavior and disrespect, Carm refuses to do any proper parenting and instead just hands him off to Tony and goes, fuck it, he's your problem now. She criticizes Tony for spoiling AJ with cool shit, but when push comes to shove, she takes the easy way out. I understand why Carm did this in the first place, considering how much of a dick AJ's been to her in this episode, as well as this season to an extent. But like, you're his mom. Show that little shit who's boss. That's your job. I believe the ending of this episode represents the regret Carm feels for not taking a more direct approach with AJ, as she's reminded that, at the end of the day, AJ is still her child, and that she still loves him regardless of what they've gone through. It's not like Carm is the only one in this situation to blame, though, because Tony is equally, if not more, responsible for this. Same as Carmela, he refuses to take any serious action against AJ's poor behavior and simply takes the easy route, taking AJ at his word that he only had a couple of beers despite his history of lying about stuff like this, and even excusing his behavior is just simply dumb teenage shit. Which it is, but that's not really the point here. Tony's privileged criminal lifestyle has caused him to take a meh who cares approach to raising AJ, resulting in AJ continuing to make the same mistakes constantly. While AJ is obviously responsible for the dumb shit that he does, at the end of the day, Carm and Tony are also equally to blame for AJ's pattern of misbehavior. Jesus, I sound like a school principal. Okay, anyways, this episode is great. It's great to see the executive game return, and the moment with all the crew members laughing at Tony's joke is maybe the greatest scene ever. I'm feeling a light S tier in this one. Season 5, Episode 5, Irregular Around the Margins. Whoa, what the fuck? Where are we going? We open on Meadow and Finn dancing at the Crazy Horse, and Meadow accidentally runs into Tony, who Tony happily greets and tells her to have fun before storming over to Adriana and asking why the hell she's here. Adriana notes to San Severino that Tony's been open the club more often recently and talks about a phone call she received from one of Chris's guys, saying that he'd see Chris soon in a certain location before Adriana nearly shits her pants and rushes into a gas station bathroom. Tony gets something removed from the top of his forehead at the doctor's, while Adriana also has an encounter at the doctor's, checking in on her increasing bathroom trouble. The doctor asks Adriana if this might be caused by anything stress-related recently, and Adriana says there's nothing she can think of besides being forced to conspire with the United States government against the people she loves. Tony claims to Carm that the bandage on his forehead is only from banging it on the medicine chest, and watches Carm draw fruit while eating an apple louder than a jet engine. And Adriana tells Chris that she likely has IBS, saying that she might be on Prozac soon to handle the stress that's causing it, pretending like she's only stressed about war in the Middle East and not being forced to conspire with the United States government against the people she loves. Later at the club, Adriana kicks off a conversation with Tony, and she admits that she has IBS as Tony reveals that he has cancer, saying that his doctors believe that they removed whatever was left of it in his body from his forehead. The two start bonding with each other over their diseases, with the two asking each other not to tell anybody else about this, as Adriana randomly throws in how good of a father Tony is while smiling and giggling. Chris acts like an ass to Adriana while getting ready to conduct business with a guy on the phone mentioned earlier, complaining about his tooth hurting and saying that Adriana gets to take all the pills she wants while he can't take shit because he's sober. Later that night, Tony accidentally walks down on Adriana snorting coke at the club, and he decides to join her, and the two make fun of Christopher for being a lame loser by being sober. Adriana mentions that she used to be scared of Tony when she first met him, and the two begin playing a very flirtatious game of darts, and Adriana at one point accidentally drops the darts on the floor and is like, ooh, I hope I don't hit my mouth on your penis, hee hee hee. The room starts getting hot and heavy as the two stare at each other longingly for a moment, and they nearly kiss when they're interrupted by the loudest hell knocking courtesy of Phil and one of his guys, who hands Tony some money while Adriana flees the scene. We're treated to an extra beefy Melfi Tony scene as Tony finally trudges his way back into therapy, where Tony says that he deeply regrets calling Melfi a He brings up the scene we just witnessed, saying that he had a very close call with Adriana the other day. And Melfi deems this to be great progress, mentioning that the old Tony likely would have just dove in dick first rather than thinking about it. Which isn't exactly true given the fact that they definitely would have boned had it not been for Philia Tardo busting down the door. Tony says that he never thinks with his dick, as Melfi points out that he once played Battleship not only with his Gumar, but also his Gumar's cousin. And Tony talks about Adriana and how hot she is, and how he believes he could start a family with her, though admits that this option is basically impossible. He states that he was lucky that things didn't go far the first time since he's not able to control himself, as Melfi says that he absolutely can control himself, giving him ideas on how to set boundaries between him and Adriana. And once again congratulates Tony on this milestone of not playing Battleship with someone for 5 goddamn minutes. She tells Tony that it'd probably be a good idea to keep his distance from Adriana if he can't keep it in his pants, and changes the subject over to Tony's confession earlier this season, saying that Tony was able to survive that, and that Tony now has the choice to either keep letting his sexual urges get the best of him or use this opportunity as a chance to better himself and his relationship with Adriana. We interestingly cut to a bunch of ducks in a pond as Adriana tells Sanseverino that Tony used to have ducks in his pool, drawing back to what Tony said earlier about believing he could start a family with Adriana. And Adriana talks about how wonderful and dreamy Tony is before insisting to Sanseverino that she's not going to play Battleship with him, saying that she loves Chris and that they're going to move out from New Jersey one day.
Jesus Christ. She's a good-looking woman and she wants to fuck Barney Rubble?
Who the hell is Barney Rubble? Oh my god, he looks exactly like him. Adriana once again runs into Tony at the Crazy Horse, asking if he has Chris's number since he hasn't left a new one yet. But Tony's like, nah, he'll call back. Adriana later walks into the office after closing time, and pitches getting some blow with Tony, an offer that Tony agrees to as he gives Adriana a ride in his car. Adriana says that one of her friends would think that Tony's cute, as Tony says that he'd love to meet the girl Adriana brought over to the house for dinner that one time, referring to FBI agent Deborah, and Adriana quickly says that she died from drowning at a picnic. Tony becomes a wee bit distracted by this news, but not too distracted to not notice anything on the road.
Tony! What's going on? Oh my god!
Tony loves animals so much that he'd rather risk killing himself and his cousin's girlfriend instead of a raccoon. A true Italian-American hero.
End of story.
The doctor tells Tony that he's free from any injuries as Tony requests to see Adriana, who definitely took the brunt of the accident, and he comforts her as Adriana says she wants to get out soon since Chris is gonna arrive home shortly, which the two realize might be a mild issue considering the sort of kind of almost affair that they had. Chris arrives back to New Jersey with an ungodly amount of cigarettes, and he's informed by these two guys that Adriana got into a car accident with Tony, which sets off some alarm bells in Chris's head as he heads over to pick up Adriana. He asks Adriana what the hell she was doing with Tony in a car in the middle of the night miles away from home, and Adriana gets defensive and claims that they were just getting something to eat, while Chris demands Adriana for the truth. Chris later meets with Tony at the Bing while he scrapes shit off his shoe, and has the goal to ask Chris to throw it away for him, which Chris angrily obliges. Tony attempts to clear the air on any suspicions Chris might have, saying that he was just giving Adriana a ride home and that they were on their way to pick up food. But Chris continues confronting Tony and asks why he was alone in the car with his fiance at 2 in the morning. Tony claims that they were talking about how special Chris is to Adriana and says that Chris ought to be more thankful for her, pushing the blame onto Chris by claiming that Adriana is completely out of his league looks-wise and that he should have married her years ago. But Chris notes how much of a Battleship fiend Tony's been this entire show, as Tony swears on his children that nothing has or will happen between him and Adriana, causing Chris to storm out of the Bing. We learn that the mob wives aren't the only mob-affiliated folks who can spread a rumor far and wide, as the guys mistakenly twist the news that Adriana survived the blow to the head from the car accident to Adriana gave Tony a blowjob. This news ends up reaching the FBI is because of the guys discussing this development of the pork store, where Vito claims that Adriana was calling him up constantly while Chris was in rehab. A detail that lines up pretty funny with the one Adriana gave back in season 4, where she told Sanseverino that Vito was contacting her frequently. The chatter quickly dissipates as Chris walks into the room, however, and he calls Vito a fat ass before throwing his Jimmy Johns at him and storming out of there. As a result of the rumor inflating as large as a parade float, Chris angrily arrives back to the apartment and confronts Adriana, saying that everyone knows that Adriana sucked Tony's dick, as Adriana tries desperately telling Chris that none of this is true. Chris asks once again what the hell Adriana was hanging out in Dover with Tony for, and Adriana says that she was just gonna clean the apartment before Chris loses his shit. He claims that Adriana is trying to make him use again and starts beating his car accident victim girlfriend and dragging her by the hair, telling her to never come back to the apartment again. And he starts chugging back a bottle of vodka as Tony's informed by Tony B of Chris's broken sobriety streak. Tony hilariously asks where Chris's self-control is, like he did nearly just fuck his girlfriend, and later brings AJ over to live with Carm, pizza in hand. Tony hands Carm over the pizza, as Carm speculates that Tony only came over to check in and see if Carm heard that Adriana sucked suck my dick rumor, and chastises Tony for putting his son in hiding and drops his pizza on the floor. Tony ignores the pizza on the floor and leaves the pizza on the floor, but decides to grab the pizza that was on the floor that Carm dropped the pizza on the floor. And he walks out of the floor as the pizza is on the floor, and Tony grabs it and the pizza, and Carm drops the pizza, and Carm drops. Chris goes full crazy drunk mode and fools around over to the Bing, locating Tony's car and blasting him full of holes. And he runs into the Bing and starts yelling for Tony, with Silvio commanding the bouncers to drag him away and hilariously telling everyone that it's just an unhappy customer. The crew takes Chris out in the middle of nowhere, and he's dragged out of the car and forced to the ground as Tony marches over. Chris claims that Tony sent him to North Carolina so that he could play Battleship with Adriana, and Chris adamantly refuses to back down, sticking to his guns while Tony sticks his gun to his forehead. Paulie tries sticking up for Chris, saying that Chris probably didn't intend on actually killing Tony in the Bing since he already pumped the rest of his ammo into Tony's car. But Chris sees this as an insult and tries attacking Paulie before being hurled to the ground once more. Tony, the guy who tried to get it on with Adriana, tells Chris to either accept the fact that he didn't try to get it on with Adriana or take a bullet to the head. And Chris defiantly stares Tony in the eyes, unfazed.
Motherfucker.
Tony, come on! Listen to somebody else for a change.
Fuck him.
Tony, try it my way. Listen to me.
Tony B takes Tony and Chris to the hospital that Tony and Adriana checked into, and they meet up with the same doctor and bring him into the car, attempting to clear up the rumor that Adriana sucked off Tony. The doctor asks how he's supposed to do that, as Tony B asks if a certain injury to Adriana's body as a result of her wearing a seatbelt was found during her examination, flexing his massage therapist knowledge as the doctor confirms this, putting the dick-sucking rumor to rest. Chris says that, while he now knows the truth, it won't make a difference since everyone else believes the rumor anyway, saying that'll look like a jerk-off before leaving the car. The next day, Tony tries to settle the rumor with Carmela as Carm notes that Meadows saw Tony at the club earlier this episode. Asking what she and AJ are going to think about the rumors, Tony tells Carm that she hasn't exactly been a saint either. Carm silently admits to Tony that she believes he didn't play Battleship with Adriana as Tony's like, "Oh goody, now can you bail me out?" But Carm tells Tony that his cycle of bullshit never ends before storming upstairs. Adriana meets with Sanseverino again, who pitches the idea of bugging the crazy horse when she talks with Tony. But Adriana tells Sanseverino that that ain't happening and that there was no relationship between her and Tony, telling Sanseverino that she would have killed Christopher if he was in a car with another woman before leaving the car from another woman. Later that night, Tony and Carm head to dinner with Vesuvio with Adriana and Chris while several mob guys watch. Clearing up the Adriana wiener chomping rumors, Vito awkwardly walks over to the table to test the waters, and the show fades to black, ending the episode. This is another one of those episodes that I enjoyed a lot more on my first viewing rather than on rewatch. Still a great episode though. One minor issue that I have with this episode is the hookup between Tony and Adriana. It wasn't badly written or acted or shot or anything like that. It's more the fact that I don't really find Tony and Adriana getting together believable, you know what I mean? Like with Tony's past Gumars, there's always a certain romantic chemistry between him and whatever woman he's playing Battleship with that episode that was notably absent between Tony and Adriana. And the fact that they basically had to give Tony cancer in order to kick off his and Adriana's semi-affair is a bit ridiculous. While Adriana's IBS remains a minor plot point throughout season 5, we never really hear much from any of Tony's cancer troubles at any point in the show, or hell, even this episode. If the writers spent more time fleshing out Tony's fears of this disease so that he could better empathize with Adriana, I feel like that would have made their relationship 5 times more believable. Maybe Tony could have been like, "Oh man, I feel like something's eating away at me," and that would have related to Adriana having to rat to the government along with her disease or something like that. But instead it's like, "I have cancer. I have IBS. Wow, really? Let's fuck." I don't know. Their whole lovey-dovey dynamic in this episode just felt very unnatural and clunky. However, what wasn't clunky about this development was the avalanche of conflict that results from the car crash. I absolutely love the pacing of the last half of this episode. Watching Chris very quickly lose his mind over the rumors, the rest of the crew tries to reel him in. It was very entertaining to watch, even though I felt really bad for Adriana when she got her shit rocked. It's another one of those situations where there really isn't anybody that you can truly root for. You can't root for Tony, considering the fact that he tried to sleep with a family member's fiance, along with the fact that he lied to Chris to his face and essentially forced him to believe his lies. Even though the rumors weren't true, they might as well have been, given the fact that Adriana and Tony went up to Dover for basically the exact reason that Chris believed it was. You can't really root for Chris either though, considering his behavior toward Adriana in both this and the past couple episodes, along with the fact that he beat the shit out of Adriana right after she suffered a car crash. You understand why Chris was mad, but at the same time, the whole thing really wasn't worth losing his mind over, even though it kind of was, since the rumor was true to an extent. The only person you can kind of root for is Adriana, considering how much shit she had to face in this episode, but like, she cheated on her fiance, which is understandable with how much of a dick Chris has been, but still bad. And she even admitted that she would have also lost her mind if her and Chris swapped places. It's good writing, it makes you think. Overall, this is another very solid episode. I'm feeling another S tier for this one. Season 5, Episode 6, Sentimental Education. Got yourself a gun. Wait, hold on, I forgot my phone. Tony B continues the laundry hustle as the truck fools around off into the sunset without him. His boss Kim believes that he secretly stole the truck as Tony B insists that he had nothing to do with it. And Kim continues giving Tony B shit, saying he wouldn't have hired him if he wasn't affiliated with Tony Soprano, while AJ complains that there isn't any Raisin Bran in the house. Tony criticizes AJ for doing nothing but talking on the phone and watching TV all day as AJ knows that Tony basically does the same thing. And the two nearly start going at it with each other before Tony takes AJ's corn pops and dumps them down the sink, turning them into sink pops. God, I suck. Carm takes some time deciding what to wear before talking with Mr. Wegler, where he informs Carm that AJ's recent essay on Animal Farm was likely plagiarized. Carm, being the smart parent that she is, goes, "That can't be true. He spent the whole afternoon at the library on Saturday," and claims that the teachers are biased because of AJ's background. Mr. Wegler says that AJ's grade is mostly weighted on a Lord of the Flies paper later in the semester and approaches Carm with a warm look on his face, asking if she'd like to go to dinner with him and admitting that he finds Carm attractive and appreciates her bluntness and honesty. The family eats dinner while Tony B's girlfriend Gwen tries having him eat lasagna while he studies for massage therapy. And Carm eats dinner with Father Phil, telling him about the recent romantic developments between her and Mr. Wegler. She talks about how wonderful and dreamy he is before Father Phil says that they should involve Tony in this conversation, reminding Carm that they committed to each other before God as Carm goes, "Yes, so what?" and says that Tony isn't exactly free from sin either. Boss Kim admits to Tony B that it was two kids who stole the truck the other day and asks Tony B about his massage studying, with Tony B saying that he's trying to pass the licensing test so he can become an official masseur, as Boss Kim believes that he and Tony B have a lot in common, mentioning how he too worked through hard times to eventually become the boss of his company. He makes a special offer to Tony B, giving him access to a failed travel agency that he can transform into a massage parlor, and mentions his daughter that he wants to convince to go back into physical therapy, saying that he, his daughter, and Tony B can make great money through this venture. Tony B thanks Boss Kim for this offer as Tony brings AJ back to Carm since they can't stop bickering with each other. AJ says that he'll call the cops on Tony for abusing him as Tony threatens to abuse him, and Carm reminds AJ that he said that living with her made him miserable before saying that he can live with her again on the grounds that he gets good grades, controls his potty mouth, and involves Carm in his life more. AJ unceremoniously agrees to these terms as Tony says to Carm that he believes AJ's time at his place whipped him into shape as Carm's like, and leaves. Tony B does some studying with the help of Vito as Paulie asks why Tony B wants to touch strangers for a living, alternatively asking why going to the bathroom and Battleship happen within 2 inches of each other as Tony B mentions the pressure he's under now with the big opportunity given to him by Boss Kim. Tony B says that being in prison isn't much different from being an immigrant as Paulie hilariously says remember Pearl Harbor as if the Koreans did that and not the Japanese. And Mr. Wegler gifts Carm a copy of Madame Bovary, which Carm thinks is boring while Mr. Wegler attempts to convince her that it's not. Mr. Wegler tries making a move on Carmela, and Carm is initially conflicted before going full ham on Mr. Wegler the moment he kisses her. They head back to the house as Mr. Wegler starts working his little Wegler on Carm, and later that night, she finds a book in the bathroom called The Letters of Abelard and Heloise, which Mr. Wegler says is a story about a 12th century scholar who impregnates one of his underage students and gets his balls chopped off for it. He talks about the importance of education as Carm worries about AJ not getting into college, but Mr. Wegler insists that all the students at his school matriculate. Carm secretly arrives back home while AJ talks to his friend, and she notices the picture of AJ and Tony fishing that AJ stared at all the way back in season 1, reminding Carm of the commitment she made with Tony as she grabs a secretly placed gun and hides it under her pillow. Tony B takes the licensing test and ends up passing, which shocks Tony B as Gwen hugs him. Carm makes a confession to Father Phil and admits that she played Battleship with Wegler, professing her mixed feelings on the matter as she says that she feels good despite knowing that she violated her commitment to Tony. She claims that a fiery passion has been reawakened inside of her as Father Phil criticizes her for wanting him to absolve her of a sin that she's gonna keep committing, and tells Carm to pray for Tony so that God will touch both of their hearts. Tony B takes Tony to the travel agency / massage parlor, with Tony B apologizing to Tony for going civilian rather than joining his crew. And Kim's daughter Amanda arrives at the building, with Tony staring at her like a leprechaun stares at a pot of gold as Chris ruins any chance of Battleship by telling an Asians eat dogs joke directly in front of her. Tony B says that Amanda will be working in the books and gets frustrated at Tony and Chris getting distracted by how hot Amanda is. And Rosalie and Carm discuss the hot game of Battleship between her and Wegler before AJ spoils the fun by walking into the kitchen. AJ says that Mr. Wegler is gay as Carm goes, yeah, probably, and sends him upstairs. And Rosalie cries after seeing this interaction, reminiscing on dumbass Jackie Jr. Tony B and Gwen take a walk in the middle of the night as a gaggle of drug dealers tosses 12 grand and a bunch of crack out their car, and the two swipe it up, with Tony B saying that he's gonna buy Gwen a ring as Gwen says he should put it back into the business. AJ's lazy ass falls asleep while Carm tries to help him with his Lord of the Flies paper. And Tony B talks to the Soprano crew at the Bang about his lucky encounter while Wegler and Carm playfully eat dinner together. The next day, Carm gets 5 minutes at Freddy's jump scared by Tony as Tony reveals that AJ bought an A+ Lord of the Flies paper to pass off as his own. And she gets a call from Wegler, who attempts to kick off some phone battleship before Carm cuts him off early. And Tony claims that Wegler is gay as Carm gets defensive about this and asks what Tony's got against being gay. Though Tony reminds Carm of her previous thoughts on gay people before going out for a swim. Tony B plays blackjack with a crew at a casino while Carm continues getting busy with Wegler, though is preoccupied with AJ's attempt to cheat his Lord of the Flies paper, saying that AJ would never lie like that ever in his life ever, as Mr. Wegler points out AJ's previous attempt to cheat back at his last school. Carm claims that everyone except AJ is at fault for AJ sucking at school, as Wegler says that she's worrying over nothing, but Carm remains too preoccupied and leaves early, telling Wegler about her commitment to Tony before fooling around back home. The guys drop Tony B off the next morning in the massage parlor, while Wegler tries to get Carm to stop worrying about AJ by convincing one of his teachers to heighten one of his grades to a C-. And Tony B takes his kids over to the massage parlor, talking about them working here one day while they ignore him and play Mother 3. Later that night, Carm wastes absolutely zero time playing Battleship with Wegler. And Carm once again yaps about AJ and figuring out ways to get him into a good college before Wegler suddenly gets up from bed, telling Carm that he can't keep this fling going between him and her. He says that he feels terrible for bending his own staff to his will and appealing to Carmela, saying that he believes that Carmela is only using him to help AJ advance through school and college easily, noting that she left him with blue balls the other night when he wouldn't entertain Carm's AJ thoughts and then went ultra hardcore sexy mode on him the moment he did something to help AJ. Carm predictably thinks this is ridiculous and storms out of the room, saying that she thought he cared about her and warning Wegler to watch his step. Tony B ends up blowing the 12 grand he got from the drug dealers at poker with a crew. And the next day, Tony B continues remodeling the massage parlor, where he finds out from Gwen that the massage tables were delivered to the wrong address.
I looked inside, though. I'm pretty spiff. That Salamanca fabric was worth it. It's like leather almost.
Salamanca? It's Salamanca. I ought to put you in a hospital so I can blow it up with my wheelchair. Tony B talks about how work is making him miserable as Gwen criticizes him for his complaining and gambling. And Tony B hangs up the phone once Boss Kim walks through the door, with Tony B criticizing Kim's pronunciation of West Caldwell and punching him in the face and hitting him with wood and splashing him into the koi pond and hitting him with wood again. Tony B stumbles out of the place while Carm's father helps do handiwork at Carm's place. She tells her father about Wegler, calling him a wolf in sheep's clothing and lamenting that her previous marriage with Tony will always cause others to view her actions and motives in a negative light. Which, wow, marrying a mob guy makes people think less of you? What? Tony B meets Tony Vesuvio and requests Tony for a spot back in the game, admitting that the massage parlor idea is more than likely a bust, while Tony says it's difficult doing business with strangers. And the show fades to black, ending the episode. This episode was pretty good. I thought Carm's material in this episode was really good, and I enjoyed the dynamic between her and Mr. Wegler, even though it felt like half of this episode was dedicated to them playing like 30 rounds of Battleship. This is up there with University as one of the horniest Sopranos episodes. I feel like her and Wegler would have gone a long way had Carm not been so needy for help with AJ. Carm had to go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like, please help me cheat AJ through high school. She got too used to getting all of the things she wants from Tony, causing her to believe that Mr. Wegler would do the exact same thing with no question. I also really like Tony B's material in this episode as well, as we watch him get sucked back into the game despite his hard work studying and becoming a licensed massage therapist. I thought the out of nowhere 12 grand he received from the drug dealer served as a great piece of symbolism for Tony B's eventual return to the mob, as he ends up putting nearly every penny back into the crew rather than his up and coming massage parlor or his relationship with his girlfriend. Tony claims to love Tony B like a brother, but rather than supporting and helping him through his new venture, he instead silently judges Tony B for this decision, subtly pressuring Tony B to go back down the same harmful, miserable route that he's on. Dick. I'm feeling a B tier for this one. Season 5, Episode 7, In Camelot. Ooh, whoa. I just got this weird chill down my back. Like something bad's gonna happen. Probably nothing. Janice and Tony make up after the epic duel from a few episodes back as they prepare dinner. And Bobby Jr. asks if they can have a dog as Janice makes fun of him for pissing the bed. Tony says that he used to have a dog named Tippy. Nippy! No, not that one. Way back when, but that he had to be taken away for worms. And Tony learns that his father lied to him and that Tippy was put down instead. Tony learns of another loss immediately after this one, getting a call from cousin Josephine that Aunt Cachette died. And we cut to the funeral, where Tony asks if Junior would like to join in to grieve Johnny Soprano, as Junior says that's lame and leaves. Tony heads to his father's grave and notices some random woman sitting on the bench, and it's revealed to be one of Johnny's Gumars from way back in the day, Fran Felstein, who greets Tony as the two sit on the bench together. She gives Tony her condolences for Livia, as Tony says that Livia sucked, and Fran tells Tony that Johnny was proud of him and found Tony special, as Tony later tells Junior of Fran's return, and Junior reveals that Fran was the reason he never married, saying that he was planning on proposing to her but that he didn't want to bring her to the mafia life, which Johnny ended up doing instead. Junior starts singing for quite literally no reason, as we're taken to an AA meeting and introduced to JT Dolan, played by Tim Daly, one of the celebrities working with Noah's father back in season 3. JT reveals himself to be a TV writer that ended up getting too caught up in the world of drugs and alcohol and got checked into a rehab center, the place where he met and befriended Christopher. And Tony talks to Melfi about Fran, saying that she gave his father what Livia refused to give him, like love and basic human compassion. He says that he can't recall a single time Livia went to visit Johnny's grave, and Melfi speculates that Livia might have been too grief-stricken to go, as Tony sarcastically says, "Poor you." Ironically very Livia-like, as he bashes her character. Later that night, Chris and JT meet at a diner and talk about JT's ventures in the industry.
That Law and Order money? Guy could have his own battleship.
Chris admits that his sober streak broke recently when he had some wine and not an entire fucking bottle of vodka. And JT tells Chris to call him if he ever starts struggling again before ditching the diner early to meet a friend, with Chris giving him a weird look. Junior tries snooping around the newspaper for funerals he can attend while contacting his lawyer for approval. And Tony visits Fran's place and notices an old picture of her son and this oddly familiar looking dog, hilariously finding out that Tibia wasn't put down but rather given to Fran as a gift from Johnny. And Tony gets pissed as Fran says she had no idea. They look at ancient pictures of Johnny and Hesh as Fran reveals that Hesh screwed her out of her retirement money, saying that Johnny, Hesh, and Phil Leotardo owned a share of a racetrack and that Johnny promised to give her his share when he died, but that Hesh refused to give that share back to her. Fran becomes emotional as Tony feels bad for her, taking her out for a ride to the very same racetrack. On the way over, he mentions Junior's love for her back in the day, with Fran describing his behavior as more stalker-like rather than lovey-dovey. And Tony talks about his relationship with Karma, the racetrack, while Chris accuses JT in the gym of using, saying that he left the diner the other night a little too quickly as JT insists that he's not slipping. Fran and Tony go out for a walk by the tracks and find out that the racetrack was recently sold and will be having its last race soon. And Tony confronts Hesh later that night about him not giving away the share, with Hesh saying it's because he's been helping with the racetrack's financials on his lonesome. He says that Tony never sees him except when he needs to complain at 2 o'clock in the morning, referring to the meetup between him and Tony from all the way back in season 2, and promises to give the share back to Tony as long as Phil Leotardo promises to cough up his cash as well. Junior's lawyer gets a third funeral in 1 month approved for him, while Chris and JT celebrate some gambling winnings, and Chris offers to hook JT up in a real game while Tony attends a sit down with Phil, Hesh, and others, with Johnny Sachs saying that Tony will get 150 grand, 25% coming out of Phil's pocket and the rest out of Hesh's. Phil loudly complains about this as Tony tells Phil that the future is now, old man, telling him not to call him kid and that he's got 5 days to fork over his cash before leaving with Silvio. Phil tries claiming that Tony was out of line and undermines Tony's position as boss, and Tony later tells Fran that everything's straightened out as Fran excitedly reveals to Tony that she had a relationship with former president of the United States John fucking Kennedy, his actual middle name, saying that he personally took her aside so she wasn't working with the Russians, wink wink, and says that the biggest difference between herself and Livia is that when she hooked up with a powerful man, she made sure to make him feel powerful, unlike Livia, who beat everyone and everything around her to the ground mentally with her constant bitching and moaning. Tony gives Fran some extra cash to get off her feet as Fran says his father would be proud, and JT gets absolutely blasted at the executive game while Valentina gets absolutely blasted by Tony. Junior wakes up the next morning and strikes gold as he finds out from Bobby that a guy at the dry cleaner's kid died, giving Junior a wonderful opportunity to get out of the house once more. Chris arrives back in the game the next day to discover that JT is still there, shit out of luck. Chris is surprised that the guy with addiction problems got addicted to gambling as JT requests Chris for a loan, which Chris obliges, giving him a $60,000 loan with compounding interest rates, saying that he's not going to enable this sort of behavior despite literally introducing the game to him. Tony notices Phil getting ice cream in one of the funniest scenes of the episode and tries confronting him to get his money, and Phil tries fooling around out of there as Tony proves himself to be the true fooling arounder, chasing him down and eventually trapping him behind a truck.
Jesus Christ. Mister, you okay in there? Oh, my... You all right? You run from me, you fucking cocksucker? Where's my fucking money?
Tony gives Phil 24 hours to get his cash, so we cut to people crying for their tragic loss of the funeral while Junior happily munches away at the food. Similarly to Tony, Chris waltzes into JT's apartment to ask where his money is, with JT saying he doesn't have it, but insisting that the paycheck's gonna hit soon when he works with Dick Wolf, the creator of Law & Order. But Chris tells JT about his negative experience in the entertainment industry with Jon Favreau and tells JT to also get him his money in 24 hours. Tony brings Fran to dinner at Vesuvio and talks to her about how Uncle Zio was taking Aunt Cachette's death pretty hard, and Fran flexes her shoes that she bought rather than paying her phone bill. 24 hours later, Chris walks into JT's apartment with backup, Little Paulie. And JT asks Chris what more harm they could possibly do to him before Chris and Little Paulie start beating his ass. Junior attends his 5th funeral in 1 month, this time Uncle Zio's, who died just a few days after Aunt Cachette. And Junior begins loudly crying to himself and gets escorted out by Bobby and company. The show flexes the fact that it's won 10 Emmys up to this point in its run as JT tries pawning off one of his Emmys, though the store owner only offers $15 for it since it's an award for television and not an Oscar. A pretty funny self-owned by the show. Chris gets the money from Little Paulie and finds out that JT's relapsed back into heroin. And Chris goes, wow, that sucks, being sober rules, before sipping a glass of whiskey. Fran and Tony have a drink at her place to celebrate Fran getting her racetrack share. And she takes out some bacon-wrapped chestnuts from the oven before Tony gives Fran a hat that once belonged to JFK. I feel a disturbance. Like something has gone horribly, horribly wrong.
Happy birthday.
Oh my fucking god, no! No! I thought Skylar's performance was just a one-time thing! No! Please don't sing!
Happy birthday.
No! After that horrifying scene, we find out JT lost the Law & Order gig as Chris blames the entire ordeal on JT like he didn't get him into gambling. And the show gifts us with one of the greatest transitions ever.
Why didn't you call your sponsor?
I couldn't get him.
So why the fuck didn't you call me?
There's no chance that wasn't intentional. The show transitions us into this great scene, as Tony describes to Melfi a scary moment from back in his youth. He says that he received a note from his Aunt Quinn that a pregnant Livia was in the hospital bleeding and to contact his dad as soon as possible, who later told Tony to wait for him the next morning. At the hospital, Livia confronted Johnny and claimed that he was with his Gumars. Johnny insists that he was at a Yankees game, though Tony completely blew their cover by saying they were at cousin Jimmy's house instead. In the present, Tony laments that Livia could have died from a miscarriage before going fuck her. And Melfi asks if Tony personally blamed his father, the man whose actions, like his lying and cheating, Tony emulates to this day, which Tony doesn't answer. Melfi says that Tony needs to forgive Livia so he can be at peace with himself, as Tony brings up the fact that Johnny likely gave away Tibby because of Livia, speculating that Livia would have had it killed if it was up to her. Chris takes JT's car to help pay off his debt and takes him to rehab, saying that there is no chemical solution to a spiritual problem before dropping him off. Janice and Tony take Junior to the doctors, where Junior says that the medicine he's been taking recently to improve his memory has stopped working. He vents his personal frustrations to the doctor and says that he feels like he's living in his own grave with no wife or children to speak of. We cut to the Bing, where Tony talks about Fran and their previous fling with JFK, and the show fades to black as Tony smokes a cigar, ending the episode. In Camelot is one of the more infamous episodes of The Sopranos, joining the ranks of Christopher and A Hit is a Hit as one of the weaker episodes of the show. And going into this episode on rewatch, I was expecting that to be the case. However, surprisingly enough, not only did I enjoy this episode, but I actually found it to be pretty great. Ignoring the gigantic pink 20-ton elephant in the room, there was a lot to enjoy about this episode. I found Tony's whole plotline with Fran to be a lot more engaging than the first time I watched it, as it gave us a rare extensive deep dive into Tony, his family, and his crew's past. In Camelot actually reminds me a lot of Mandola from Breaking Bad, as both are great episodes of their respective shows that are unfortunately overshadowed by the Chernobyl-level cringe of each other's happy birthday scenes. We're introduced to new guy JT Dolan, who I really enjoyed watching this episode. My favorite archetype in the show has got to be the guy who is far too confident about the situation he's getting himself into and ends up suffering as a result, with notable examples like Davey Scatino, Artie Bucco, and now JT Dolan. These characters are among some of my favorites for very similar reasons, on top of just being very well written and well performed. Chris and JT's dynamic in this episode reminds me a lot of Tony and Davey's dynamic back in The Happy Wanderer, as the friendship between both characters sours after one tries getting into mob-affiliated activities. Though JT Dolan was more of a victim of circumstance who had very little self-control, while Davey Scatino was just a plain degenerate. Like, Tony told Davey that he really shouldn't get involved in the game, while Chris was like, dude, this shit is hardcore, you gotta join! Junior wanting to get out of the house thanks to his new medication and using the funeral loophole was such a funny bit. He literally recreated that one meme of the guy stacking food on his plate at the funeral. All of the plot lines in this episode were very entertaining to follow, and apart from the traumatizing happy birthday scene, it was a very, very solid watch. I'm probably gonna get some flack for saying this, but I am honestly feeling an S tier for this one. Season 5, Episode 8, Marco Polo. Marco! Polo, woke up this morning. Got yourself a gun. Little Carmine flexes his new house in front of members of the New York crew, where he offers them brand spanking new washing machines in exchange for their support. And his son runs inside to tell him that his boat is just sunken out of nowhere. Meanwhile, Carm's dad works on the Soprano family roof and falls off and dies. Not really, but Carm's mother says that she wishes she died first, as Carm says that it'll be alright, refusing to cancel his 75th birthday party. The doctor informs the two that Carm's father is gonna be okay, and they discuss whether or not to invite Tony to the party while this guy struggles giving birth in front of them. Johnny flexes his new Maserati in front of Tony before talking to him about the fooling around incident from last episode with Phil, saying that Phil is still ranting and raving about it and that he wants his captains to continue their loyalty to himself. Pissed that little Carmine's trying to reel them in with washing machines. Johnny reminds Tony of the good he's done for him the last few episodes with the racetrack and whatnot, as Tony agrees to pay for Phil's car damages. And they fool around over to the auto body shop, once run by Pussy, now run by Angie, where Tony asks if they can fix up Phil's car and to keep costs as low as possible so that Tony doesn't need to shill out any more cash. Carm arrives at Livia's place and sits in front of a table just completely coated in junk food. And Tony finally receives his daily paper that he would usually get around 7 episodes earlier. They talk about Carm's father recovering from the falls. Carm says that she wants to run his birthday party by herself without Tony's help. And Tony pretends like he isn't pissed off at this, as these subtle camera zoom-ins imply otherwise. He pretends like he already decided this months ago and passive-aggressively hands over some cash. And Carm says that he should really see a therapist, as Tony goes, "No, you see a therapist," while Carm leaves. Junior falls asleep watching Beat Rice as Bobby walks in with some danishes, with Junior complaining that his medication is making him fall asleep, while Bobby says Junior needs to take it consistently. Junior learns that he didn't receive an invite to Carm's father's surprise birthday party, and Junior immediately ruins the surprise by calling up Carm's father and telling him about the party. We see some of Tony B's first true business with the crew as he gives Tony his share for the week, and he tells Tony that he believes he could be more useful in other areas of the Soprano crew's business, with Tony telling him to chill out, as Tony B describes himself as Charlie Hustle, yet another connection between the Sopranos and Breaking Bad universes. Tony B asks if Tony's gonna bring cigars to the birthday party, as Tony admits that he's not going, with Tony pretending like he was the one who made that decision and not his ex-wife. Phil walks into Angie's shop wearing the cone of shame and asks Pussy's brother what happened to Pussy, and he tells Phil that he doesn't want to talk about it before showing the car to Phil, with Phil complaining about every nitty-gritty detail of it and telling Angie to call him when the job's done right. Carm's father confesses to Carmela that Junior spoiled the surprise party for him, with Carm calling Junior a miserable fuck, while Carm's father interestingly repeats a quote from his earlier phone call with Junior.
In my age, it's surprise enough to be able to get out of bed every morning.
At our age, it's enough surprise every day when we get up in the morning, right?
Carm's mom talks about how their old friend Dr. Fagoli will be joining the party with his wife, and she glazes Dr. Fagoli by listing his accomplishments as Carm's dad finds out that Tony won't be attending the party, and he angrily storms out of the house, saying that he's not attending the party if the man of the house won't be coming. Angie complains to Tony about Phil being a saying that she didn't want to work on any extra stuff without contacting Tony, as Tony says it's her call and hangs up. Tony calls Tony B and tells him to be there when the Shah of Iran picks up his car, and Tony B later acts out Jackie Gleason bits in front of Rusty and Angelo. The two give Tony B an opportunity to hone his previous mafioso skills by offering him a paid job, informing Tony B that a friend of the New York crew, Joey Peeps, needs to be taken care of in retaliation for the death of Lorraine, saying that she was close friends with little Carmine back in high school, as Tony B says that he wants to avoid any conflict with the New Jersey and New York crews. Carm tells Tony that her father wants him over for the party, and Tony says he'll see what he can do, as we cut to the party the next day, where Tony B's kids kick off the party by ruining one of Carm's beach chairs. Tony B tries making small talk with Carm, while Carm stresses the fuck out over making food, and AJ criticizes Carm for not sending a summer school letter to Mr. Wegler's. Carm tells AJ that she and Mr. Wegler stopped fucking 2 episodes ago. Just kidding. Meadow and Finn walk in the house, with Meadow helping Carm make dessert while talking to Tony B about Kelly, Tony B's anarchy daughter, who cut contact with Tony B many years back. Carm's parents arrive incredibly early to the party to help out, much to the frustration of Carm, and Tony B hilariously fucks off out of the house and heads to the shop, where Phil continues being a stubborn ass despite Tony B saying that the car is completely fine. He leaves Angie to replace a $2,000 seat for the car as the birthday party officially kicks off, where Tony B carries a camcorder trying to clip farm for America's Funniest Home Videos, while Carm complains that the other Tony hasn't arrived yet as Tony arrives. Tony wraps some sausage links around his neck and walks out to the back in one of the funniest moments in Sopranos history.
Hey, happy birthday to you. Got salsicha for you.
Tony has a short talk with the previously mentioned Dr. Fagoli, with Carm's mom looking extremely uncomfortable. And Carm raises a toast to her father as he thanks Tony for having them in his humble abode while also giving his wife a fat kiss on the lips. Carm's dad opens up a gift from Tony, which turns out to be a high-quality 12-gauge shotgun. And Carm tells Tony B to take a video of her father fucking around with it.
Bet the freezer full of venison this year, you.
You got it, kid.
Oh, the humanity! Tony B films Carmela's ass as the party continues on into the night, with Carm telling Tony that her father's gonna be pleased about that gun for a very long time, and the two share a slightly romantic rolling rock with each other.
Rolling rock? Rolling rocker.
Meadow and Tony B discuss the flaws and discrimination in the US legal system as Tony sits down at their table, with Meadow and Tony loving each other in front of Tony B, who silently and sadly thinks about the lack of love he's received and shared with his own daughter. He talks to Tony about Phil being a stubborn bitch as Tony tells Tony B to step it up while complaining about his divorce. Carm's father and Chris's mother get dragged out of the party for drinking way too much, while Tony puts Carm's father's gun in the back. Oh, the humanity! Carm's mom complains to Carmela about Tony acting casual in front of Dr. Vigoli as Carm points out that Dr. Vigoli was acting rude to Tony. And Carm calls out her mother for not wanting Tony to come so that they wouldn't seem uncultured, saying that she's proud of her heritage and accusing her mother of secretly being ashamed. Artie Bucco plays Marco Polo as Tony gets out of the pool to talk with Carm, and he surprises her by tag teaming with AJ to throw her into the pool in this great scene. She plays Marco Polo with everyone else, while Tony B finds out that one of his kids stole a set of pins from AJ's closet, saying that AJ has a ton of cool shit already and says that he doesn't want to come back to Tony B's place, which hurts Tony B's feelings as he's once again reminded of Kelly, prompting him to go, "That's it, no more Mother 3 for you," and take away their Game Boys. AJ and Devin leave the place, leaving Tony and Carm in the pool by themselves, where they talk about AJ's love for Devin and reflecting on how strong those feelings hit when you're younger. Tony starts getting handsy with Carm under the water, and while Carm initially tries refusing this affection, she eventually gives in and starts making out with him in the pool, with Tony asking Carm how nice this all feels. Artie wakes up the next day surrounded by beer bottles and balloons, and Tony B calls Rusty to tell him that he's ready to accept the job. Joey Peeps and his hooker lady get going from a party and head downtown, which is some really unfortunate timing since Tony B is also there, who walks up to Joey's car and kills him and the hooker, getting his foot run over by his car as he tries to escape the scene, ending the episode. This episode is alright. Carm's parents being the focal point of this episode seems confusing at the beginning until later in the episode, when Tony's interactions with her family causes Carm to see Tony in a different light and reignite the spark in their relationship. It was cool to see all these recurring characters meet together at this party, though I feel bad for the cast and crew because this must have been a pain in the ass to shoot, what with all these people together in one enclosed space. Not the last time HBO would have stupidly large quantities of people together. I thought the material with Dr. Vigoli was really boring. I understand they did this to flesh out Carm's father's character more, but I don't think it was very good fleshing out regardless. Like, imagine going up to a Sopranos fan and asking who their favorite character is and they say Dr. Vigoli. You either laugh at that person or you shame them by yelling in their face. The only real good that came from his character was the brief argument between Carm and her mom, but that's really about it. And to an extent, Carm and Tony rekindling their relationship, though that was really more because of Carm's parents rather than the stupid doctor. I thought Tony B should have gotten some more time in this episode. I found his silent internal conflict regarding the feelings of loss he has for his daughter really engaging. The hit scene at the end was also a great way to cap off the episode. Look, objectively speaking, killing someone is a great way to get your mind off things. I also thought the Shah of Iran looked really funny with his neck brace. Overall, I'm giving this episode a B for Marco Polo. Season 5, Episode 9, Unidentified Black Males. The two Tonys watch a baseball game in the hot sun as Tony B drops some subtle foreshadowing.
Crazy Rasta fuck used to make grilled cheese on the radiator.
Tony B claims that two black guys jumped him in the city last night. As Tony later goes to dinner with Meadow, AJ, and Finn, where Tony finds out from the waiter that Finn already covered the bill, which makes Tony very unhappy. He chastises Finn for this nice gesture, telling him to leave the payment to Tony before handing him a wad of hundreds and leaving. Tony apologizes to Finn outside the restaurant for biting his head off a bit, while Carm gets drunkety-doo with Gabriella, telling her about the crazy events that went down in their father's birthday party late into the night. They discuss whether or not Tony wants to get back with Carmela as he pulls up to the house to drop off AJ. And Johnny angrily discusses with Tony the death of Joey Peeps and how little Carmine was behind it for Lorraine's death, noting that a homeless guy said he saw a guy limping away, a fact that reminds Tony of someone else that currently has a limp. Because of this, Tony has his first panic attack in a very long time, and meanwhile, little Carmine talks to his crew about kicking off an all-out war since historically, historical changes have come from them, his words, not mine. And he says that he wants to be as effective of a boss as Carmine Sr. We cut to Meadow and Finn's god-awful stinky apartment as they argue about their current school, living, and money situations. And Carm gets a call from her new lawyer, who says that he can't work for Carm legally speaking since Tony had come in for a consultation a while back while the fucking bear comes back to wreak havoc in the backyard. The bear possibly representing Tony's everlasting presence in Carm's life. Tony confronts Tony B about pulling the hit on Joey, saying that he's desperately trying to remain a neutral party in this conflict and that he's sick of Tony B defending himself with the fact that he was the one who went away for the hijack and not Tony. with Tony B noting that Tony's the one who keeps bringing that up. Tony says that he wished Tony B would be straight with him since he's got very useful skills. And Tony B tells him to give him an opportunity as Tony offers him an open casino as well as allowing him to join Tony's other operations in the near future. Tony talks to Melfi about Tony B's intellect, mentioning his official IQ of 158, as well as the fact that he slept with Carmela again for the first time in forever. Though he says that he left before she woke up since it would send mixed signals, a statement that concerns Melfi before Tony ignores her and takes a business call right in front of her. Carm has a meeting with her divorce lawyer, where they discuss Carm's relationship with Tony as well as the assets they both own, and mentions that there's a lot of unreported income that she wants, but not to worry about it since it's completely legal and not illegal and from the mob. Meadow tells Finn that Tony was able to secure him a job at the construction site, and he has a conversation about baseball with the guys before Paulie walks in to interrupt and tells Finn to wash his tires pipsqueak. Paulie finds out that Finn is dating Meadow and quickly tries to make things right by giving him some cash for a hot dinner courtesy of Uncle Paulie. And he has the other Paulie do the tire work for him while Tony and Carm go out to Vesuvio to discuss their divorce proceedings, much to the surprise of Tony. Tony accuses Carm of ambushing him as Carm tells Tony that she's moving on with her life despite the fact that she made out with Tony like 10 minutes ago. An event that Tony brings up as Carm says that didn't change anything even though it kinda did. She says that her lawyer is going to pursue both custody of AJ as well as half their stuff. And Tony goes, wait, what do you mean there? As Carm claims that Tony is only providing her the bare minimum of her needs despite living in a $2 million mansion with a pool and 15 bedrooms. During this dispute, Artie arrives at the table like 8 times to see if they're ready to order while Tony tells him to beat it. And Tony once again brings up Carm taking 40 grand out of the bird feeder last season. He gets up to leave the restaurant, but before he does, he angrily leans over and tells Carm that her entire lifestyle is funded by the bad things he does, calling her out for acting like she isn't responsible for turning a blind eye to Tony's sins.
But you walk around that fucking mansion in your $500 shoes and your diamond rings, and you act like butter wouldn't melt in your mouth.
I want what I am entitled to.
You're entitled to shit. She's ready to order.
Despite everything that Tony's put Carm through, I gotta say, he's got a really good point here. The biggest reason Carm left Tony was because of the harm he did to her rather than the harm he's done to hundreds of others. And she was told to her face directly that tolerating his behavior is unacceptable. Yet despite the guilt Carm has faced, she refuses to accept and internalize this, going as far as to make love to the man that she's apparently been trying to distance herself from. Call me crazy, but I don't think making out with a man that you're trying to separate and take his assets from is a very good business strategy. And acting like you're somehow above him despite tolerating his crimes is dumb. Finn talks with his girl Felicia on the construction site about Meadow and gets a good look at her tramp stamp. And she tells Finn that living together is not the same as being married since one person can just ditch the place anytime they want. Vito pulls up to the convo to talk about the Cubs beating Finn's Padres the night before. And Finn suspiciously asks if this girl's dating anyone at this present moment while Carm shops with Meadow for clothes, where Carm tells Meadow that Tony stopped paying for her credit card bills. Meadow says that's weird since they were acting all happy at Carm's father's party as Carm says that she's moving ahead with a divorce. And Meadow essentially tells Carm to get a job and to stop being dependent on another man as Carm goes womp womp and moves on. Philly pulls up to the construction site with his brother Billy, and little Paulie makes a comment implying that Gene likes men as Gene gets up to respond respectfully and maturely.
I'm gonna take a piss. Do me a favor, huh? Hold this.
Finn becomes sick watching the scene unfold as Vito tells Gene to take the day off and blames the event on 2 black guys. Man, I can't believe the amount of harassment that the Soprano crew is getting from those 2 specific black guys. I mean, what did the Soprano crew do to deserve this besides everything? Finn talks to Meadow about the beating he watched take place and how horrifying it was, with Finn asking how Meadow grew up with this as Meadow says she never saw any violence growing up, therefore it did not happen. Finn asks more about Meadow's background, bringing up Jackie Jr.'s death as Meadow claims that he was killed by drug dealers and not his own people, taking after her mother and attempting to convince Finn that everything's hunky-dory, saying that the mafia guys are just practicing tradition and not killing people for money. Not even Meadow is immune from defending her father's heinous actions due to the advantages that her lifestyle gains from them. At the funeral, Tony hilariously finds out that the custom headstone the crew made for Joey has the name Peeps written on it instead of his actual last name. And Tony attempts to apologize to Johnny for this as Johnny says that he believes that Tony B was behind Joey's murder thanks to new eyewitness testimony, and talks about how he wants to kill him, little Carmine, and his wife before Tony forces him into the limo to talk. While Silvio and Phil have the most disappointing conversation ever.
How's your daughter doing?
Good.
Tony tells Johnny that he hasn't been himself ever since Carmine Sr. passed. And he lies to Johnny and says that Tony B was with him the night Joey Peeps was killed, spinning a story about him trying to find Tony B's missing daughter, as Johnny says that Tony better not be lying before getting out of the car, staring at Tony B for a moment as Tony does the same. The crew convinces Finn to take a load off with them, easing Finn in despite Finn's nervousness after the Snapple-ass beating he witnessed earlier. And Chris talks about Tony B getting a sick promotion with a casino and how jealous he is about this, claiming that Tony doesn't value him like he used to ever since he's gotten clean off drugs and that he's favoriting Tony B as the best cousin over Chris. Adriana later gives Sanseverino a call as the show cuts to Finn hanging out with Meadow and company at a beach, and Finn leaves early to go to work, and when he pulls into the parking lot, he makes an absolutely insane discovery. Oh my god! Later in the day, Finn gets jump scared to the porta-john by Vito, who pulls a very surreal intimidation/flirtation routine on Finn by offering him tickets to a Yankees-Padres game, third baseline, on bat night. Vito essentially forces Finn to go, and he leaves as Finn rushes back into the porta-john to process what the fuck is going on. Every time I watch this scene, I can't help but think about that one meme where Vito's photoshopped in front of a battlefield from one of the Star Wars prequels. I don't think they placed the actors in front of a green screen for this, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did considering how unnatural everything looks. Finn decides not to go as Meadow asks why he wouldn't go, and Finn brings up him spotting Vito catching, not pitching. And Meadow says that's not possible since he's a married man, like that's literally ever stopped anyone. Meadow notices that Finn brought out a briefcase and connects the dots, with Finn admitting that he's not going back to the site under fear of death. And Meadow whines like a baby that she's gonna get a mouthful from Tony due to the strings he pulled to get Finn the job, like she's the one who got borderline sexually harassed earlier. Finn asks if it's all about Meadow, as Meadow asks if Finn ever considers her feelings while not considering Finn's feelings, and claims that this whole debacle is just an excuse for him not to commit to their relationship. Finn doesn't do himself any favors and claims that him getting the suitcase is just thinking out loud. And Finn asks if they can just stop fighting as Meadow storms away from the conversation. Vito hilariously waits outside the stadium in his decked out Yankees outfit. And the fight between Meadow and Finn continues late into the night as Meadow asks if they're gonna keep being a couple. And Finn ends up falling asleep and pissing off Meadow even more. Finn continues lying and claiming that there wasn't any intention behind him bringing out the suitcase as Meadow runs into the bathroom crying. The two calm down for a moment as Finn suddenly makes the suggestion of getting married to Meadow, saying that he can't think but that it's something that he feels strongly towards. Carm finds out that her lawyer, along with multiple of his colleagues, don't want to take Carm's case due to Tony's involvement, which pisses off Carmela as we cut to another Melfi meeting, where Tony admits that he had another panic attack earlier this episode, though claims that it was because of the death of Joey Peeps and not because of the guy who killed him. Tony mentions that his panic attacks kicked off again when Melfi started refusing his advances earlier this season, the first time resulting from a conversation he overheard from his maid regarding her cousin, and the second time happening when Tony B came over to borrow some tools. Melfi notes that all these attacks seem to have the recurring theme of someone's cousin being involved, almost like Tony B is the cause of Tony's attacks or something. And Tony admits that he worries about Tony B, mentioning that he got sent to jail for hijacking a truck full of Betamaxes and that he was supposed to be there that night. He claims that he was supposed to go but couldn't due to getting jumped by a bunch of guys who were no particular skin color.
They cut my fucking head open, a fucking
Tony claims that people see Tony B as the noble one and him as the bum for doing nothing, saying that he's had it great in life while Tony B lost so much while in prison, his guilt explaining his recent bouts of panic attacks. Melfi pitches the idea of coming clean to Tony B as Tony starts hyperventilating, and he confesses to Melfi that he wasn't jumped by a bunch of black guys that night, but rather that he had a panic attack the night of the robbery. He says that he got it after having a fight with his mother about his family, saying that he told Livia that Carmelo loved her as Livia went on and on about how everything sucks. He admits to Melfi that he lied to Tony B and the rest of his crew about this to save face, saying that him giving Tony B a stronger place in the crew was just him compensating for his own guilt and describing the therapy process quite elegantly.
You know, sometimes what happens in here is like taking a shit.
Yes, okay. Although I preferred to think of it more like childbirth.
Trust me. It's like taking a shit.
Carm arrives home with groceries and notices Tony lying down in the pool, unhappily looking out the window and walking upstairs to her room. And she receives a call from an excited Meadow, who informs Carm that she got engaged to Finn, which causes Carm to start crying as she congratulates Meadow while looking at Tony out the window, ending the episode. This episode was awesome. The scene with Tony and Melfi near the end of this episode is easily one of the best scenes of this episode, maybe even one of the best Melfi scenes ever, or top 5 at least. This sudden, violent explosion of emotions is masterfully delivered by James Gandolfini in this incredible performance. And the build-up toward those feelings in this episode, what with his panic attack at the golf course along with trying to mediate Johnny and little Carmine's conflict by defending his cousin, is extremely well written and acted as well. It's an amazing payoff to a very subtle yet noticeable conflict between Tony and Tony B B that we've been seeing frequently throughout the season. Tony's not the only family member that we see a notable change in attitude from either, as Meadow acts noticeably more defensive toward Tony and his crew's mob activities when discussing them with Finn, acting like everything is just fine and nowhere near as bad as it really is. Like when she sarcastically brought up Finn's dental work and saying that he can't hang with the common folk when originally saying he didn't want to go with Vito to the game. Season 3 Meadow would have torn Season 5 Meadow a new asshole for this. Oh, by the way, Vito's gay, everybody. Surprise! A completely out of left field development from the show that really starts to pick up steam next season, so stay tuned for that. Much like the construction guy's penis, Vito's cover is blown. Alright, I think that's about where I peak with the gay jokes. I'm gonna quit while I'm ahead. That scene with Vito confronting Finn in the porta potty is another standout from this episode. I love how uncomfortable the whole thing is. The show does a great job putting you into Finn's incredibly awkward position, as it's hard to tell whether Vito wants to fuck him, kill him, or both. This is a very Finn-heavy episode, which I'm glad about because I really enjoy his character and his performance. I'm putting this episode near the very top of A tier. Season 5, Episode 10, Cold Cuts.
Born under a bad sound with the blue moon in your eyes.
Tony finds out that 2 of his guys were left to wait by the dock for a delivery of scooters all night, with Johnny passive-aggressively claiming it's because of heightened security and going, wow, it's weird, first your cousin didn't kill Joey and now I didn't intentionally fuck you over, before fooling around off. We're treated to the long time-honored Sopranos tradition of parents acting like lunatic shitbags at their kids' sports games, with Janice being one of those shitbags. The hootin' and hollerin' reaches a boiling point as Janice starts beefing with one of the parents for their kid being a douchebag.
Are you crazy? Oh! Somebody! How do you like it now?
Tony tells the crew about Johnny screwing them over, as Silvio knows that Johnny's suddenly acting this way after the chat him and Tony had at the funeral. And Tony tells Benny to hang around the port to find out what's the deal before finding out from Carm that Janice got taken away by the police, with the media doing a full Dateline NBC-like investigation on Janice's outbursts as Tony stares at the TV in complete and utter befuddlement. They have on a psychologist talking about how certain individuals are more prone to outbursts as Tony has an outburst and storms over to the Baccalieri residence, where Janice says she's gonna sue the township as Tony tells her that she definitely fucking ain't.
That bitch is lucky I didn't kill her.
Well, we know that.
Oh shit! Tony tells Bobby to get control of his wife before Bobby follows Tony out the door, trying to find the good from this situation in yet another really funny scene.
I know this looks bad, but on the other hand, she called Sophia her daughter.
I don't give a fuck. All right, I do give a fuck.
Hooray! Yeah! Tony tells Bobby once again to get control of Janice, while Sophia tells Janice off for being crazy, saying that she doesn't want to see her friends there again and that Janice isn't her real parent, which hurts Janice's feelings as Bobby asks to talk with Janice. Bobby tells Janice that she should really see an anger specialist as Janice tells Bobby that he should stop being a fat fuck. But Bobby stands up to Janice and says that his family can't live with this constant anger and tension, telling Janice to either see a specialist or their relationship is donezo. Paulie tells Chris at a gambling hall that he understands the frustrations he's going through with him and Tony B as the show cuts to the next day, where Chris and Adriana try out wedding cakes while Tony blares the horn outside. Tony sends Chris on a mission to New York, this time with Tony B, with Chris making a sarcastic remark to Tony B before leaving. He tells Adriana about the place they're going to, his Uncle Pat's farm, and talks to Adriana about Tony B and how him and Tony used to tease him when he was way younger, giving her a story of how they once tied him to a tree for an initiation and left him there until 3 in the morning. He claims that that relationship is the same as it once was due to Tony favoring Tony B over Chris for promotions. And Adriana notes how angry Chris has been, pitching the idea of the two moving far away from this lifestyle and having Chris go into something else, like screenwriting, which Chris says he'll get back to again one day while telling Adriana that he's a soldier to Tony first and foremost. Tony finds out that Carmela drained the pool, saying that Tony was the only one who used it as Tony breathes angrily at her. And Tony talks to Carm inside about throwing an engagement party for Finn, with Carm hesitant about Meadow getting engaged so early in her life as Tony convinces Carm that things won't be so bad for her as things currently are between him and Carm. Janice goes to an anger management class and starts sympathizing with his black lady Evelyn before saying something mildly racist. And she talks about how much she wants to punch the anger management counselor in the face before Evelyn tells Janice what the counselor is trying to tell her, saying that they're the people who continue to let certain situations fester in themselves rather than moving on like everyone else does. Tony B tries making small talk with Chris while Chris passive-aggressively tells him not to scuff up his car. And they reflect on their experiences at Uncle Pat's farm as Tony B talks about how certain people used to call him Ichabod Crane as an insult, showing Chris that he wasn't the only one who got the short end of the stick. Tony tells Melfi that the hot sexy pool makeout session with Carm was only a one-time deal, and Melfi asks for a follow-up on the Tony B freakout from last episode, with Tony saying that he hasn't put much time into that and talks about his sister beating up the lady at the soccer game. Melfi decides to change the topic to the main subject of this episode, anger, which she describes as depression turned inward, as Tony tells Melfi that having anger as a boss is terrible since it clouds your judgment severely, saying that it's better as a boss to just smile, wave, and kill the other guy later. He says that revenge is like serving cold cuts, a phrase that Melfi corrects while asking why the need for revenge is so consistent in his family, implying that it's the fault of both Livia and Johnny Soprano, saying that Livia wasn't the one who cut off a guy's finger in front of Tony. She tells Tony that he too also blows up at the smallest inconvenience, as Tony mentions Janice taking anger management classes, though Tony says he'd never go to these classes while admitting that bottling up his anger is bad for him. At Uncle Pat's farm, Chris and Tony B eat with Uncle Pat and his daughter Louise, and Tony B and Chris discuss with Uncle Pat the real reason why they're up there, asking where they buried one of the bodies as the two get to digging later that night. They bond over making fun of Tony while they excavate the place, with Tony B lamenting the fact that he's gotten so much less fun and more miserable over the years after becoming boss. Chris locates the skull of his very first kill from all the way back in the pilot episode, and Benny and this other guy track down a security guard at the port to find out what happened to the scooters, with the security guard saying that it was Phil Leotardo and his guys, while Tony B and Chris churn the bones of the bodies they found at dust. Chris thanks Tony B for his help, as Tony B simply says that he's his cousin, and he discusses Tony giving him the casino, saying that he knew that he'd get flack for that, but that he stood up for his family and went to prison because of it, saying that he kinda deserves a taste and that he still loves Tony like a brother, which Chris agrees with. They dump the crushed up skeleton bits into the lake while Benny tells Tony that Johnny has the scooters, with Tony speculating that Johnny still thinks that Tony B killed Joey Peeps. And while he wants to get angry, Tony thinks about his meeting with Melfi along with Janice's outburst and keeps his anger to himself.
Motherfuckers!
Carm has an awkward run-in with Mr. Wegler, who attempts to make things right with Carm as Carm suddenly reveals that she's going back with Tony. And the show decides to immediately top this surprising moment with something so utterly baffling and confusing that it needs to be seen to believed. What the fuck? In a show chock full of strange, nonsensical, and inconsistent creative choices, none of them stand out with quite the level of bravado that this one 15-second edit does. Except for the Livia CGI, that was really bad. It's one of the most head-scratching moments in all of The Sopranos, because not only is it a weird edit, but it's also a really, really bad one. Let's break it down. So after Carm's run-in with Mr. Wegler, the show puts this moment into slow motion until it becomes a freeze frame. That freeze frame disappearing into the Star Wars-like wipe transition, yet another weird Star Wars connection to this show. The slowdown freeze frame moment is already incredibly sloppy. You can tell for a fact that the director of this episode did not initially want this moment to have any slow motion. But that sloppiness is made even worse by the wipe transition, since it's like, why the fuck would you freeze frame just to wipe to another scene? Like, why not just jump cut to it instead? I think the biggest question here is why? Why this scene in particular? What motivated the people working on the show and post to use this Street Fighter combo of terrible editing? And who on earth approved this? Why did they approve this? Was it multiple people who approved this? Did they honestly think it was a good idea, or did one guy on drugs just convince everyone that it had layers of meaning to it? I just don't get it! Or maybe I do. Okay, I have a theory as to why this edit is the way it is and why it's in the show in the first place. So we know for a fact that Carm is fighting off feelings that she has with Tony, as she's trying her best to separate herself from Tony despite the fact that they were doing some hot battleship stuff in the pool just a few episodes ago. While she hasn't said a word to Tony about wanting to get back together with him, we know that it's entirely possible that she might reconsider getting back together. And this moment is one of the first real, oh shit, this might actually happen moments for the audience. What I think was supposed to happen during this scene was that we were supposed to see her face and notice that she has mixed feelings on what she just said to Mr. Wegler. But what I believe happened was that the crew wasn't able to get enough coverage during this scene for the audience to process the look on Carm's face. You can see during this part that if they didn't slow down the footage, Carm would have walked off screen a little too quickly for us to catch it. So to compensate for this, rather than just reshooting the scene, they decided to instead pull this incredibly strange and off-putting slow down freeze frame then wipe edit, resulting in one of the weirdest yet most memorable moments both from this episode and the entire series as a whole. They tried to emphasize Carm's expression with this edit, but the edit is so strange and inconsistent with the rest of the show that it completely overshadows its original intention. Again, it's just a theory, but I have a pretty strong feeling that it's true. Chris tells Uncle Pat about how he's gone sober, as Uncle Pat remembers where the other remaining bodies are located. And Janice claims to Tony that she's sorry for the way that she's acted, saying that she knows it's bad for the business and family and how she feels like a completely new person. She says that anger management taught her how to not act on anger, as Tony claims that people just say that so they can walk all over you. But Tony tells Janice that he's happy for her regardless and sits blankly at the table while police sirens blare in the background for some reason. Tony decides to make a surprise visit to Uncle Pat's and plays cards with everyone. And the show cuts to Tony oral farming next to the pond later that day, as the show cuts again to Chris and Tony B chucking the remaining body chunks into the lake once more. Afterwards, they head to a restaurant to celebrate a job well done, where Tony B reuses a fat line he used on Tony earlier to call Louise fat, and Chris laughs and pretends like he hadn't heard that one yet. Tony and Tony B talk about Chris being in recovery and begin breaking his balls, with each sequential joke pissing Chris off more and more, as Tony tells Chris to have a drink, saying that his constant sober behavior is sucking the fun out of everything, as Tony B laughs at this exchange. Chris tries apologizing for this, as Tony says that Chris is doing the right thing, and Tony B and Tony continue having fun poking fun at Chris. And while Chris tries to pump the brakes on this by mentioning Tony B reusing his fat line and saying that he could have called Tony B Ichabod Crane, the jokes directed at Chris keep on coming while Chris looks miserable. Later that night, Tony goes channel surfing and lands on a piece about shipping containers and how US Customs physically cannot look through every one of them without stopping the global economy, a fact that makes Tony feel warm inside. He becomes a lot less warm when he finds out that terrorists can use these to detonate a nuclear weapon, a fact that he repeats at breakfast the next morning as nobody really gives a shit. Tony and Tony B make a joke about Chris taking atomic bomb level shits as Chris leaves Uncle Pat's farm early, and he cries to himself on the way home, sad about the fact that not much has changed between him, Tony, and Tony B's dynamic from when they were younger. While I kind of understand where Chris is coming from, I personally think he's just being a baby about this whole situation. While it was kind of fucked up of Tony to tell a recovering heroin addict to have a drink and saying that he's making things less fun for everyone, the rest of the jokes that were directed at Chris via the two Tonys really weren't that bad or hurtful or personal. At least not that bad to leave early and cry on the car ride home. I think it's kind of funny that Chris is acting this way like he's some sort of blameless victim, even though he beats up and yells at his girlfriend like every 2 episodes, and also just dug up a bunch of bodies, one of which he was responsible for the death of. I can't say he's the only one who acts like this though. You call Tony fat one time and he'll berate you and fucking kill you. The crew hangs out of the Bing as the two Tonys walk inside while carrying in shit from the farm. And Tony talks about the concerns with terrorism in the ports and how they're all sitting ducks, saying they could be annihilated at any second, as Georgie shows that he's learned absolutely nothing from every beating he's taken and chimes in with something stupid. The next day, Paulie informs Tony about Georgie, saying that he's gonna be fine other than some hearing loss in one of his ears. Tony, remembering Janice's advice toward becoming a less angry person, tries making up to Georgie by giving some extra cash, but learns from Paulie that Georgie's gonna be quitting his job at the Bing and that he doesn't want to see Tony again, which makes Tony realize that his anger has made things worse yet again. And just like that, the Georgie gets beat up counter has tracked its final beat up. I was kind of hoping it would go on longer, but hey, at least we got the gabagool counter. Karn tells Rosalie about her saying she'll get back together with Tony to Mr. Wegler while claiming that this will totally never happen in the future. And we cut to Janice's place, where Sophia shows Janice respect by putting away a can of Hawaiian punch she was gonna drink before dinner. Tony notices Janice's much less angry personality as she politely tells some telemarketers to not call again while Tony yells at her to hang up. While Sunday dinner initially goes well, Tony decides to put Janice's anger management to the test and rage baits the living hell out of her by bringing up Harpo, Janice's son from her first marriage, which Bobby Jr. and Sophia are surprised by. Tony pokes and prods Janice by mentioning the song he was named after and accusing Janice of abandoning him, which results in exactly what you think it does. Tony walks out of the house as the credits roll before the show fades to black, ending the episode. I like this episode a lot. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier with Chris making too big a deal out of Tony and Tony B making fun of him, because Tony can be a real fucking piece of shit if he wants to. It's kind of fucked up the way that Tony just seemingly refuses to let the people around him better themselves and instead drags them down to his level, like challenging Janice's new attitude by targeting the most sensitive emotional area of her character. It's a prime example of this sort of behavior occurring, even if Janice kind of deserves it. I love the material with Chris and the two Tonys, and I really like the way that the episode explored the topic of anger and how different characters deal with it. With Janice earnestly attempting to better herself only to succumb to her old ways, Chris silently crying to himself as he leaves the farm early, and Tony doing basically nothing to improve himself other than feeling slightly bad and trying to fix issues he caused with money. This episode was also chock full of memorable and great moments, like the previously discussed stupid-ass Star Wars edit, Janice beating up someone's mother at the soccer game, I don't give a fuck, alright I do give a fuck, the ending fight between Tony and Janice, as well as Chris conflicting with the two Tonys at dinner after the body dumping. I'm putting this episode near the bottom of S tier. Season 5, Episode 11, The Test Dream. Got yourself a gun. Got yourself a gun. The episode really opens on a high note as Tony and Valentina wrap up a game of Battleship. And Valentina cooks breakfast while getting pissed at Tony for barely paying attention to her despite him getting a divorce. Oh my freaking gosh. Tony puts out the fire while the smoke alarm blares in the background, and Tony B blows some smoke from his mouth while meeting up with Angelo and his son, who give Tony B some extra cash for the Joey Peeps hit, as well as this terrible sign that Tony B hangs on the wall. Tony, looking like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, meets a badly burned Valentina in the hospital, trying to make her feel better while Valentina barely clings on to consciousness. Angelo gets some hot dogs from Costco and gets followed by Philly and Billy Leotardo, who claim that Johnny needs to see him immediately before strangling Angelo and shooting him in their car.
Billy, you know me.
You couldn't fucking retire?
Billy, for God's sake, you know me.
Tony begins realizing that he misses his old home as he chastises his maid for throwing away the daily paper, which would have never flown if this were a season opener Tony. But post-divorce Tony lets it slide as the maid offers him to bake him enchiladas to make up for it. Tony gives these enchiladas to Tony B while asking him to fork up some money, and he tells Tony B about Valentina's incident and the distinct burning hair scent that he smelled, which Tony notes was one of the last things Carmine mentioned before he died.
Smell that?
What?
Bernie here.
I smell cut grass.
Tony rants to Tony B about Valentina being a pain in his ass, while Tony B acts noticeably more irritable and on edge, angrily cleaning up his kids' belongings while listening to Tony bitch and moan. He talks about Artie's wife Charmaine and how hot she is, saying that she's a fantastic cook unlike Valentina, and claims that she's the kind of woman he needs in his life, mentioning that it nearly worked out between the two all those years ago. Tony B criticizes the twins for making a mess and says he's taking them to their moms early, and later, to get away from all of his stresses and people burning alive, Tony checks himself into the plaza in New York, where Melfi of all people is also staying, much to Tony's surprise. At the suite, Tony places photos of Meadow and AJ on his nightstand and gets absolutely ganked in the shower. And he gives Charmaine a call, though he doesn't say anything as she hangs up the phone. Tony does various shit in his hotel room and stumbles upon an ad for an escort service, which Tony calls up before stealing his neighbor's paper in the hallway. He finds out from Silvio that Angelo got killed the other night and that it was likely the fault of Phil. And Tony tries calling Tony B to see where he is due to his emotional connection to Angelo, with no luck. He calls Aunt Quinn and finds out that she hasn't heard from Tony B ever since he took the kids back to her place that morning, and tells her to call him if she hears from Tony B. Tony ends this hot streak of calls with one to Paulie, trying to ask if he's seen Tony B before getting interrupted by the escort he called for earlier. He notes to Paulie how squirrely he was acting this morning and says that he's worried that Tony B might do something rash. Paulie says he'll let Tony know if he pops up as Tony prepares to get busy with the escort, and later that night, she asks Tony if he wants her to suck his dick, prompting Tony to turn around and whoop, that's not an escort. What follows in this episode is one of the longest and most in-depth dream sequences in the entirety of The Sopranos, over 20 minutes in length, and I'm going to try my best to delve into and analyze as much of it as I possibly can. Instead of presenting the entire sequence and then analyzing it afterwards, I'm going to be going scene by scene due to the sheer amount of dream to cover here. Some sequences of this dream function less like dreams and more like actual scenes, so for those I'll be treating them more like actual scenes rather than dreams. You'll see what I mean here in a second. Tony quickly scrambles out of bed as Carmine talks about how lonely he is on the other side without his wife Violet, and the phone starts ringing while Carmine tells him to answer it. When Tony answers the phone, the man in the other line tells Tony that a friend of theirs needs to be taken care of, saying not to fuck the job up due to its importance as the guy hangs up. Carmine making a surprise appearance in Tony's dream is more than likely the result of the scene from earlier where Tony was talking to Tony B about Carmine and his burning hair remark, and the person that the man in the other line is referring to is probably Tony B, as Tony is worried about what Tony B will do after the murder of his close friend Angelo. The show does something very similar to the Funhouse dream sequence and fakes the audience out with Tony explaining the previous scene in Melfi's office. Except, whoops, it's not Melfi, it's actually Gloria. Another similar connection to the Funhouse dream, as that dream also had Melfi replaced by one of Tony's love interests. The two discuss Carmine mind being sad despite being on the other side, or in heaven as Tony theorizes. Which Gloria says doesn't sound like heaven, as Tony says she'd know more about that than him since she died. Tony tries asking what Gloria saw in him, as Gloria says that the goal of these meetings is to find out what he saw in her. And Tony starts quoting the honeymooners, while Gloria notes the times Tony hit Gloria during their relationship, with Gloria's voice suddenly and briefly changing to Dr. Melfi's, another similarity to the Funhouse dream sequence.
And then you choked the shit out of me.
Yeah, but that's after you were trying to put a fork in my eye.
Oh, that was your mother.
Tony and Gloria share a very similar exchange that Tony and Melfi did a few episodes back, saying that therapy sometimes feels like taking a shit, as Gloria says it's more like childbirth. But instead of sticking to his guns, Tony entertains this thought and says Gloria probably knows that feeling better. And the tone suddenly shifts as Gloria says she died far too young to have any children of her own. A very sudden confrontation from Tony's subconscious as Tony changes the subject, saying that Tony B can do a great Jackie Gleason, a reference to Tony B's past impersonations of him this season.
Boy, are you fat.
This scene has a handful of callbacks to the show, like Tony B's Gleason impersonations, as well as the guys watching The Honeymooners a couple episodes back. The show also calls back to Tony's mom threatening to stick a fork in his eye when he was a child. Yet another connection between Gloria and Livia that the show lays out to Tony.
Oh, poor you.
I believe Gloria speaking with Melfi's voice for a moment is Tony's subconscious telling him that Melfi shares a lot of qualities that Tony liked about Gloria, like her intelligence and her independence. Before Gloria and Tony kiss, Gloria asks Tony if he's ready and points at a television set showing Tony riding the back seat of the same car from last season's Bout of Dreams. In this car are 3 dead guys, Johnny Soprano, Pussy, and Mikey Palmisi of all people. Mikey suddenly changes to Artie Bucco while Pussy changes to Ralphie, who tells Tony that he's being taken to the job, likely referring to whacking Tony B. Johnny recreates the show's intro and fools around into Tony's driveway as the show cuts to inside, where Carm tells Tony to get ready to meet Finn's parents as Tony gets distracted by a movie playing on the TV, and he hilariously tells Carm to stop talking so he can watch it, saying that it's more important than life itself. Carm tells Tony that TV is his life, possibly referring to Tony's frequent references to movies and actors like the aforementioned Jackie Gleason and Gary Cooper, the strong silent type. And the movie changes to the end of A Christmas Carol, with Scrooge saying that the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future visited him in one night. This ending parallels the dream that Tony's currently going through pretty succinctly, as members of Tony's past, present, and future all make appearances in Tony's subconscious to deliver various messages. Carm tells Tony to get dressed, while Tony points at the TV the same way a child points at a new Hot Wheels set at Walmart, showing Carm and Tony getting ready for dinner, and Carm says she'll wait in the car, while Carm on the TV says she'll wait in the car. And Tony's teeth suddenly start falling from his mouth and into his hand as he pretends like nothing happened. Now, a lot of people believe that losing your teeth in a dream means that you're afraid of getting older, and while that's certainly a possibility for Tony, I personally believe that it means something else. A very common interpretation of losing your teeth in a dream is that it represents a loss of control felt by your subconscious. And this could very well be the case for Tony, as he has no idea where Tony B currently is or what he's going to do in the near future. At the restaurant, Charmaine directs Tony and Carm to their table as Tony notices the previously mentioned Gary Cooper on one of the TVs, and he meets Finn's parents, with the dad looking an awful lot like Detective Vin Makazian, the guy who jumped off a bridge in season 1 after getting really fed up with his son Kevin McAllister. The show presents us with a ton of uncomfortable angles as the actors look directly into the camera, or rather into Tony's eyes, with Carm talking about their connections with Artie and Charmaine while Tony says he has to leave early to take care of business. He shows everyone the tooth that fell out of his mouth as more teeth start to tumble out, and Finn's parents say they thought Finn wouldn't amount to anything as AJ suddenly replaces Finn, with Carm and Finn's parents talking about how much Finn sucks while AJ glances over at Tony, more than likely Tony's subconscious telling Tony that AJ is a dumbass. Similar to Junior earlier this season, Finn's dad / Detective Vin starts singing out of nowhere for an uncomfortably long time, and Tony points out that Finn's mother is being played by Annette Bening, who actually plays Finn's mother in this episode. While Vin keeps singing, Tony tells Annette Bening that something bad's gonna happen while Artie looks at Tony through a window while pointing, and Vin goes to piss while Tony joins along with him. Tony goes into one of the stalls trying to find something behind the toilet, and Vin asks if he's gonna be able to come through on the thing, likely referring to the hit on Tony B in the dream, and Tony repeats his earlier "I did my homework" quote and hands a book over to Vin, The Valachi Papers, a book about one of the first mafiosos to ever confirm the existence of the American Mafia. Suddenly, gunshots go off as Vin says that this is it, and the show cuts to Tony B murdering Phil while a crowd of people watches. Tony rushes through the crowd and states that he knew that this would happen, with a member of the crowd asking why he didn't stop him, and Phil gets finished off with some invisible bullets in this really funny moment.
Please.
Tony asks Tony B if he knows what he just did, as Tony B retorts by asking Tony to tell the crowd what happened the night Tony B got taken to jail. And Phil gets interviewed by a reporter, who's revealed to be Gloria again, with Phil saying that he's got kids and grandkids to think about. This entire segment is a pretty cut and dry climax to Tony's worries of Tony B throughout this dream, as Tony begins to feel the heat from the crowd around him for not killing Tony B when he had the chance. A manifestation of the feelings he's worried about receiving should worse come to worse, and Tony B actually does go through with killing Phil in real life. He tells the crowd that he doesn't have a piece to take out Tony B with, and takes a good look at the crowd, a crowd that Paulie can be seen a part of for some reason. And they start closing in on Tony as Tony runs away, with the setting suddenly changing the night as a classic mob starts chasing Tony down an alleyway. He gets shot at by a guy that kind of looks like Lee Harvey Oswald, which would make sense considering Tony's previous discovery this season with Fran and Kennedy. And Tony follows Artie into another car, where Gigi and Richie Aprile sit in the back. The show very unsubtly reminds us of Tony and Charmaine's hookup, which the dream had been hinting at a few times. This is another callback to Tony's previous conversation with Tony B, as he told him about his previous relationship with Charmaine from back in high school. Artie watches this weird game of Battleship as he tells Tony to rub her muzzle, and the horse clopping noises stop as the show cuts to Tony on an actual horse, with Carm saying that he can't come back to live in the house if he's bringing Pyomai. Tony claims that he'll clean up after Pyomai's shit, as Carm says that he always says that, likely referring to Tony's past of constant infidelity and how he always claimed to Carm that he would remain faithful and never do it again. Tony says he has to go, as Carm asks why Tony didn't take care of that, likely referring to Tony B. But Tony shows that he finally has a sick gun to kill people with before moonwalking his horse out of the living room. The show is weird. Alright, this is about where the actual dream stuff ends. The dream is still technically going, but the dialogue is much less choppy and easier to follow than it is normally in the dreams. This dream had a ton of moving parts to it. One of the main moving parts being the recurring element of Tony B and whacking him to prevent conflict with a New York crew. Throughout the dream, several characters tell Tony that Tony B needs to be taken care of, and even chastise Tony for not getting the job done when Tony finds out that he's too late. And many of the subjects in this dream come as a result of Tony bringing them up in conversation with Tony B earlier in this episode, like Carmine's death along with Tony's past relationship with Charmaine. Tony's subconscious also delivers several messages regarding multiple other aspects of Tony's life, like AJ and his potential, the guilt that he still feels for the death of Gloria, his past relationships with other women, even meeting Finn's parents for the first time. Him losing his teeth during dinner at Vesuvio could even represent the worry that he feels for Meadow in her life, as she's changed her career path from being a pediatrician to a lawyer on top of getting engaged to Finn. The frequent use of Tony being shown on TV through the dream is also more than likely a manifestation of Tony's paranoia, as he feels like he currently has many eyes on him as boss due to the debacle with Tony and the New York crew.
Total debacle.
Anyways, back to the episode. Tony faces off against one of his deepest and longest lasting insecurities, not having the makings of a varsity athlete. He walks down the hallway of his old high school and sneaks up to his high school football coach with a gun, who greets Tony inside, mocking him for bringing the gun in the first place. The coach criticizes Tony for going to therapy as Tony proclaims that he's doing better than ever, with a nice house, wife, kids, and top position of an organization, saying he's got nothing to apologize to the coach for, as the coach says that he knows what's going on between him and Carmela. And Tony tries to kill the coach before he realizes that all the bullets are made of literal shit, with the coach saying that he's not prepared and mocking him as Tony finally wakes up from his insane cavalcade of nightmares. It's really fascinating watching someone completely dominate Tony mentally and transform him into this desperate, unprepared man. And that's in big part to the acting job by Charlie Scales. A great name and a great performance, even though he's only in one scene. Tony gets up from bed to process what the hell just happened and receives a call from the lobby telling him that Mr. Montavani has come to visit. And Chris delivers Tony the news that his dreams had been trying to tell him the entire time. Tony B went apeshit and attacked the Leotardos, killing Billy and putting Philly in the hospital. Tony is pissed that Tony B lied to his face back at his mother's house, as Chris says that Tony B is probably not going to be living here soon.
Guess TB's fucked, poor guy. Poor guy. We're all fucked.
Chris steals Tony's Toblerone bar and leaves the suite. And Tony calls Carm to tell her to cancel the fishing trip with him and AJ. He also tells her that he had a dream about his coach, which we learn are recurring nightmares of Tony's, as Carm quotes the coach's unprepared line from earlier. And the two bond over their next door neighbor's dog barking as the show cuts to black, with Tony asking if it's light out where she is. The episode draws to a close. You already probably figured that this episode was gonna get a high ranking from me, and if you did, you were completely right, because this episode is pretty fucking great. The over 20-minute dream sequence in this episode is a very clear highlight for me. It makes you forget that this episode literally kicked off with a woman setting on fire. This episode gives us a complex deep dive into Tony's thoughts on his current situation with Tony B, as well as on several other aspects of his life that still affect him to this day, like his relationship with Gloria, and most especially his relationship with his old high school coach. The dream sequence is easily one of the best from the show, with some really intriguing developments and implications, along with some terrific acting. I love how the actors deliver their lines in a completely different way in Tony's dream compared to how they would talk in the actual show, rather than the sequence just having the characters talk like they normally would. It makes these sequences so much more hazy and surreal, which adds to the quality of these scenes. This dream might just be one of the most complex in the whole show, not only in terms of sheer length, but in how much subtle information and connections it delivers to the viewers. There were so many callbacks to little moments and details, not just from season 5, but from the entire show as well, many of which require multiple rewatches to really grasp and understand. I didn't even catch that Gloria saying "that was your mother" was referring to Olivia threatening to stick a fork in Tony's eye until this viewing. I thought it was like just a weird joke, but no, like it actually happened. Even outside of the big ass dream sequence though, this episode was great. I like how the episode cuts to the chase in regards to the conflict between Tony B and the Leotardos, leaving the episode with time to really delve into the issue inside of Tony's mind. I have no idea what the fuck was the point of Melfi being in the same hotel that Tony was though. Like, we see her for 2 seconds and then it doesn't really go anywhere after that. It's just kind of acknowledged and then brushed off. Overall, this episode was pretty fantastic. Even though I tried to point out and analyze as much as I could, I know for a fact that I missed at least one thing. So if there's anything that you thought I missed, just let me know in the comments. This episode is getting a sweet and savory S tier. Season 5, Episode 12, Long-Term Parking. One of the FBI guys shows Sanseverino footage of Adriana suspiciously throwing something in the garbage before taking it out of the garbage and into her car. And Adriana learns of the doctors that she's developed a case of ulcerative colitis and that she needs to take medicine that will make her ugly and fat. Carm tells Tony that her mom kept harassing AJ if Carm and Tony were getting back together. And Tony tells Carm that he knows what he did was wrong, but tries to compare his constant cheating and sleeping with other women to Carm fawning over Furio and going, "Well, we're all human, you know what I mean?" Tony claims that he will never cheat on Carmela again if they get back together, while Phil angrily reflects on the night his brother was murdered. Where we're shown that Tony B has really fucking horrible aim because Phil was literally directly in front of him. How do you have this perfect of an opportunity and you only get it half right? Little Carmine laments that everyone is at a stagmire, a mix of the words stagnant and quagmire. And Rusty tells Little Carmine that he needs to take a stand while the iron is hot, while Little Carmine says that he doesn't want to approach this that way. Tony talks to Silvio about how hard Tony B's fucked him over. And Adriana hands Chris a drink as Tony goes, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, what are you doing?" Like he wasn't just telling him to have a drink like 2 episodes ago. The guys talk about Adriana's recent sickness before leaving the Crazy Horse, with Tony stopping to tell Adriana to not listen to Chris's off-color jokes about her disease and that he and Carm might be getting back together soon. Tony and Silvio have a sit-down with Johnny and a monumentally pissed off Phil, who tells Tony to stick his condolences up his ass and heavily implies that he's gonna kill one of Tony's loved ones. Phil tells the guys to kiss his taint and leaves the room, while Johnny says that he has the right to act this way, subtly accusing Tony of cooperating with Tony B on the hit, while Tony says that Tony B lost his mind and acted alone. Johnny tells Tony that he wants Tony B on a spit, which is one of these things, so that means Johnny is pretty angry, and says that he wants him immediately or else he's gonna raise hell on the entire Soprano family. A bunch of Boy Scouts run into a dead, fly-covered body washed ashore on the beach, while Tony and Carm eat a Vesuvio, with Tony claiming that Carm's feelings regarding his infidelity finally hit home with him, which I'm sure they did. And Carm suggests the idea of purchasing land to build a spec house with her dad as a partner so he can fall off the roof and almost fucking die again, for the low price of $600,000. This deal, along with promising to never ever cheat on Carm again ever, convinces Carm to allow Tony to live back at home. Tony notices Chris drinking with Adriana and forces him into the bathroom to have a talk, not about his drinking, but rather because Chris messed up and allowed cigarettes in their operation to be sold without tax stamps. And he forces Chris to split the operation with Paulie so that this never happens again, much to Chris's frustration and disbelief. Chris throws his wine glass against the wall and drinks himself into a near coma, ranting to Adriana about Tony, saying that Tony's disrespecting him despite his loyalty, and brings up Tony telling him to have a drink when they were at the restaurant. Chris contemplates whacking Tony and says that Tony wouldn't even hesitate whacking him if he did what Tony B just did last episode, which is a fair point all things considered. And after all this, Chris plumps himself down on the couch and lays down this genuinely pretty scary quote.
"That's the guy, Adriana. My Uncle Tony. The guy I'm going to hell for."
What a great line. I hope the many saints of Newark doesn't shit all over it. The FBI guys watch security footage of detectives searching the Crazy Horse. And Tony goes to the hospital and casually tells Valentina that he's breaking up with her, which she takes well.
I'm gonna fucking kill myself.
I gotta take this.
The call that Tony receives ends up coming from Tony B, who doesn't say anything and hangs up the phone. And Silvio cleans his suit with a toothbrush while Tony calls him to put bugs on his phone line so he can catch Tony B whenever he calls up again. The FBI guys force Adriana to have a talk with them while Tony brings all his shit back into his home, with AJ later noting how fucking weird this is during dinner. Tony agrees that this is fucking weird and pops open some champagne to celebrate, toasting to his loved ones as AJ completely blows his cover and absolutely downs his glass. Carm later does the dishes while Tony watches TV with a big bowl of ice cream, indicating some normalcy in the house while Adriana's world is about to be turned upside down, as the FBI guys show her the tape of her being suspicious next to the dumpster. Adriana claims that the trash she took out contained bills and account numbers and shit, as Sanseverino shows her a picture of the body of Gilbert Nieves, the guy that washed up onto the beach, saying that Adriana told the cops that he was at the Crazy Horse that night and claiming that Adriana was trying to dispose of the evidence of his murder. The guys essentially tell Adriana that she's fucked and that she'd better start speaking now. And Adriana confesses that the murder was done by Matush, the guy who got beat up by Furio like 4 times back in season 3. We get a flashback of what went down, with Matush asking Adriana if he can fax something in her office. And Gilbert spots him and threatens Matush in the office to give his money back for ripping him off with laxatives instead of X. And Matush and his friend end up stabbing him to death, much to the shock of Adriana, who admits to the FBI guys that she helped with disposal of the body. The thing that she ended up throwing away and then decided it was a bad idea to throw away was a plastic baggie with a bloody rag in it, and claims that she helped Matush because he's nice and religious and only kills people sometimes. Chief Frank has had about enough of this and demands Adriana to cooperate, saying that she either helps the investigation or face 25 years in prison, and yells that he wants her wired up to get Tony and Chris on tape. Adriana asks for a lawyer while Tony and Carm merely play Battleship in their closet, and Chris tries getting in contact with Adriana while she waits around for a lawyer, crying in the bathroom. Sanseverino tells Adriana that all the public defenders are backed up right now as Adriana complains that she's been at the station for 8 hours, and Sanseverino tries once again to convince Adriana to take the FBI's deal, saying that her and Chris are still young and lovey-dovey and all that, and that living like this is only going to make Adriana's bowel issues flare up even more. Tony sits by the pool and reflects on fond memories with Tony B while the sound of flying ducks can be heard in the background. And Sanseverino tells the other FBI guys that Adriana might be able to get Chris to flip due to his current conflicts with Tony. Tony gets a call from Jimmy Petrillo and finds out that little Carmine has stepped down as boss, making Johnny the new boss of the New York family, with Paulie saying that little Carmine caved, while Tony laments that Johnny used to be a pragmatist, a word that little Carmine described Johnny as last season. In what is easily one of the best scenes of the entire show, Adriana sits down with Chris and tries her best to make a confession. She tells Chris about her arrest from last season and how Danielle was secretly working for the FBI, a fact that makes Chris rise from his seat. However, instead of immediately yelling at Adriana, he instead sits down in the chair across from her, stunned by this news, as Adriana desperately tries convincing Chris that she never gave away any incriminating information. She goes on and on about the FBI taking her in and how they found out about the murder, saying she tried her best to cover it up as Chris completely snaps. Chris nearly chokes Adriana to death, asking how Adriana could have done this to us, but he lets her go, loudly asking what on earth they're going to do while Adriana tries catching her breath in this incredibly intense scene.
Oh my God, what are we gonna do?
Dude, this scene fucks me up. It's this absolutely devastating payoff to a plotline that we already knew was going to end badly, we just didn't realize how badly. There were so many aspects to this scene that make it so amazing and memorable, with the most obvious being the acting by Michael Imperioli and Andrea De Matteo. These two are at the top of their game during this performance, with one of the most realistic meltdowns I've ever seen in a TV show. Chris going, "What are we gonna do?" in sheer panic is one of the most convincing portrayals of fear and dread that I've seen in a TV show, or a movie, or basically anywhere, because like, what the fuck can they do? One of my favorite parts of this scene is the moment where Adriana is spilling her guts to Chris while the camera lingers on Chris's expression for an uncomfortably long time. The show allowing us to watch Chris as he can't decide whether to cry, laugh, or explode with anger. It makes the moment where he attacks Adriana even more impactful, a scene that makes me clench up in anticipation every time I watch it. Andrea De Matteo put a lot of sweat and tears into this character, but more on that later. Oh boy, will there be more on that later. Tony gets a call from Tony B while watching television, who apologizes to Tony for what he's done as Tony tells him that he can't be coming back around here anymore. Tony B asks if he can look after his kids while he's gone, a request that Tony obliges. And Tony sarcastically asks if there's anything else that needs to be taken care of as Tony B acknowledges that he's really fucked Tony over this time. After the confession we just saw from Adriana, the show decides to give us another confession, this time from Tony, who finally admits to Tony B that the reason he couldn't join the robbery was because he passed out during a fight with his mom, saying that he felt guilty all these years, as Tony B deduces that Tony's guilt is the reason why he gave him the casino and all these other advantages in the crew.
You just take care of yourself, all right?
You too.
We'll be delving more into Tony B's character later because I got a thing or two I want to say about it. For now though, Tony calls the guy who tapped his line and obtains the current location of Tony B. And Adriana convinces Chris of their apartment that things won't be too bad if they relocate, saying that they could live in a nice house and that Chris could go back to screenwriting. And Chris says he needs to clear his head, giving Adriana an I love you before walking out the door. San Severino gets confirmation from Adriana that Chris is ready to get Goodfellas while Chris gets cigarettes. And while Chris was initially ready to join Adriana on this journey, he notices a disgruntled, less than stellar family out of the corner of his eye. Chris quickly realizes that his life won't be nearly as flashy or as eventful should he start a brand new family with Adriana. And meanwhile, Adriana receives a call from Tony, who informs her that Chris has attempted suicide. He tells Adriana that Chris was apparently upset about something, which makes Adriana shit her pants slightly as Tony says he's sending Silvio to pick her up. Adriana fantasizes about driving away from New Jersey to start a new life. With the song Leaving California going from playing in our speakers to playing from Silvio's speakers, the show hard cuts to Adriana getting a ride from Silvio. Silvio talks to Adriana and says that everything will be okay as the scenery becomes more and more secluded. And Adriana finally begins facing the reality that we as an audience already have a pretty good idea of. Silvio continues talking about how tough and resilient Chris is as Adriana begins crying, with Silvio noticing this and pretending to reassure her as they drive deeper into the woods. When they make their stop, Adriana tries climbing into the driver's seat while Silvio drags her out, giving Adriana no chance to escape. Adriana is no longer working for the fucking government. Once Adriana is murdered, Chris packs up her belongings and tosses them in the middle of nowhere, and parks her car in the middle of a long-term parking lot in an airport, tricking the world into thinking that she's flown off out of New Jersey. That same night, Tony meets with Johnny in New York, congratulating him for his promotion as boss, and Tony tells Johnny that he believes he knows where Tony B is located. Tony asks Johnny if he can take care of Tony B himself, as Johnny says that he can't allow it. And Tony's like, okay, but at least make his death quick, as stubborn Johnny's like, don't think that's happening, saying that Phil Leotardo was gonna do it his way. Johnny asks Tony if there's anything else that he wants to say to him, clearly referring to Tony B being behind the Joey Peeps hit, and Tony simply says no before telling Johnny to his face to go fuck himself, saying that Tony B's his cousin before fooling around off. Tony walks into Chris watching the Three Amigos as Chris confesses that he snorted some H, saying that he can't stand the pain as Tony beats the fuck out of him, saying that he's not the only one who had to face pain in this situation. The FBI guys realize that the Adriana operation is officially a bust, and Tony and Carm later head over to the property where the spec house will be built. The show creepily moving the camera across as the scenery bears a striking resemblance to the final resting place of Adriana. Tony thinks about Adriana and her death while Carm talks about how great the land is, and he gathers himself and sits on a stump next to Carm, looking out into the woods as the show fades to black, ending the episode. Holy shit, what an amazing episode. Adriana's murder is one of the most sudden yet most iconic moments in all of The Sopranos. You honestly believe for a moment that things are gonna be okay between Chris and Adriana and that they'll finally be able to escape the stress that the mafia life brings, but instead, his hatred of even the thought of living a mediocre life is enough to convince Chris to have his girlfriend of half a decade killed by the same crew he was just complaining about a few minutes ago. It's so uniquely tragic because much like Chris's loyalty to his crew, Adriana stuck by Chris's side through thick and thin, even though she was very clearly way too good for him. She took so much shit from Chris verbally and physically, and yet she wanted to stand by Chris's side when all the cards were stacked against her. And Chris let her down yet again. The real star of this episode is, without a doubt, Drea de Matteo. Her performance throughout the show was one of the most consistently great, and got even better the moment the FBI got a hold of her character. I'd make the argument that her character was one of the most emotionally exhausting to bring to life, right up there with Tony, as she constantly faced the business end of Chris's rage and various other emotional issues, on top of dealing with the FBI along with her medical issues. Long-term parking is by far Adriana's best episode, containing one of Drea de Matteo's best performances in the entire show. God damn, does she know how to cry. The moment when Adriana desperately tries crawling away from Silvio like a baby deer is etched into my memory. Drea de Matteo is a phenomenal actress, even though she has her son edit her OnlyFans content. I wish I was making this up. Kinda sucks, but at least it makes the death scene a little easier to watch. Despite this, her performance in the show, as well as this particular episode, was amazing. Right up there with Michael Imperioli's performance in this episode. What an absolutely incredible job on his part, with some line deliveries that I still think about on a daily basis. Him telling Adriana that Tony is the man he's going to hell for, and making you think that there might be some reconsideration of his priorities on his part, only for him to side with Tony on the murder of his girlfriend, makes for such a slap in the face plot twist. This episode was nominated for 4 Emmys and won 3, with Michael Imperioli and Dre DiMatteo both earning 1 for their acting in this episode, which was completely warranted. The only real bad part about this material is that it kind of overshadows the other plots going on in this episode, but that's okay because the Adriana stuff was the best part. I thought the moments of Carm and Tony getting back into their normal lives were sweet, even if it's the result of each other not being able to move on from their old lives and improve themselves. And I also thought the flashback with Matush and his friend murdering the Evas was a great scene. I liked when Tony broke it off with Valentina and then walked away like nothing happened, and I also enjoyed Tony beating the piss out of Chris for killing his miss. You might think that I'm gonna go back on my criticisms with Tony and Adriana getting together, since there are moments near the end of Tony regretting what he's done, but I really don't think we needed that whole plotline to justify it. She's been in the family for God knows how long, of course he's gonna feel guilty. It doesn't need to fuck her to feel bad. I especially like the moment where Tony finally admitted to Tony B the reason why he wasn't at the robbery all those years ago. I thought it was a great scene, even if it didn't feel truly satisfying or earned, but that's more the fault of other reasons that we'll get into later rather than just this specific episode. The final confrontation with the FBI guys and Adriana, the random group of Boy Scouts stumbling upon the body, Tony standing up to Johnny and telling him to go fuck himself. I could go on talking about other scenes that I like, but I would be here all day. Every scene from this episode is fantastic, and the plotlines managed to wrap themselves up in a nice little Adriana blood-stained bow. Well, mostly. We still got one more episode to go. This episode feels a lot like a finale. It doesn't feel right that there's one more episode for me to cover this season. Is long-term parking really one of the best episodes of the show? Yes. To close off this segment, I am giving long-term parking a very strong double S tier. Season 5, Episode 13. All Due Respect.
Got yourself a gun.
Philly recreates that one scene from The Godfather and looks at the body of his brother Billy. And Phil asks Johnny how long he's gotta wait for Tony to bring that animal Blundetto. And that animal Blundetto plays Battleship with random women while sneaking out in an abandoned house, under the guise that he's a caretaker. Phil begins losing his mind as he tries confronting Christopher's mother so he can find Chris and kill him, but goes a little too far trying to intimidate her and causes her to run away while Chris watches out the window. AJ heads off to school while Carm and Tony continue settling back down into their normal lives, talking about how lazy AJ continues to be and debating if they ever spoiled him too much. Carm and her father give Meadow a look at the spec house that they're planning on building, and Chris looks around his apartment, which feels less like an actual apartment and more like a graveyard, and I'm not just saying that because Adriana got kerplunked. He gets a call from Tony, who turns out to be Carm, who asks Chris if Adriana's there since her and Carm were supposed to get China for their wedding. And Chris acts as if Adriana broke up with him and just left rather than she was an informant for the FBI that got killed by Tony's crew. Carm tries telling Chris that there's other fish in the sea, a sentence that's likely tearing Chris up just an eensy bin inside as he hangs up the phone. Cleaning up the place as he stares at a photo of him and Adriana together. Ray Curnow gives some information to an FBI guy eating KFC as the guy asks if he's heard anything about Adriana lately, which Ray says no to, and he later heads to a dinner with Tony's crew, where the guys give a toast to Ray for his birthday. The guys discuss who's the most likely to get killed by the New York crew, with many of the members saying it'd be Christopher due to his age. And Bobby points out that Johnny's probably gonna squeeze them all money-wise, while Vito says that this is a bullshit cause to die for. Just as he says this, Tony walks through the door and Vito winces like a reaction gif. And Larry Barisi says he's skipping house arrest for shits and giggles as Tony gives a speech before he leaves early. He brings up the 600-pound elephant in the room, Tony B, and talks about how his anger issues have landed the crew in a metric fuck ton of trouble, as well as Tony B himself, saying that if New York gets their hands on him, they're going to torture him in ways that would make guys from the medieval times blush. And those guys had the pear of anguish. They'd shove it up your butt and then it expands so it rips open your butt. Tony commits one of the worst sins he's ever committed and lies to his crew, saying that he doesn't know where Tony B is, but that if he did, he would offer him the same protection he would to any other member in his crew to prevent him from being tortured. He says they're gonna deal with this issue as a family before leaving the place and heading back home to Carm, who asks Tony if he's heard the news that Adriana and Chris broke up, which Tony pretends like he hasn't. He claims that Chris keeps his feelings bottled up as Carm speculates that Adriana was seeing somebody, recalling her out of nowhere movie night outburst near the beginning of this season. And Carm watches a history documentary with Tony while lamenting that she can never build a house as nice as the one that they live in. Tony learns a new word from the History Channel, Fingerspitzengefühl, a German word referring to having an intuition to size up a situation, which seems awfully relevant to Tony right about now. And Chris sneaks around New Jersey to get his earnings from Silvio while eating Raising Cane's. He rants about how Tony's still showing favoritism for his cousin, as Silvio knows the things that Tony's done for Chris in his times of need. And Silvio later talks to Tony about the issue, saying that a lot of guys in the crew, including old guys like Paulie, are unhappy about this predicament. Tony puts his foot down and says Tony B is his cousin, as Silvio tells him that, all due respect, this isn't about upholding some code or rules with the guys, and that, all due respect, it's more about the fact that Tony has problems dealing with authority, mentioning him telling Johnny Sack to fuck himself last episode. Silvio deals Tony some mild criticism and says that he has pride issues, and Tony responds by saying that, all due respect,
you got no fucking idea what it's like to be number one.
He tells Silvio that being the boss sucks and that if nobody agrees with him on something, then that's too bad, proving that Tony is amazing at handling criticism. Benny hangs around the Crazy Horse and suddenly notices Phil wandering around the place like Michael Myers, and he tries to escape to his car as Phil scarily approaches from behind, attempting to lure Benny in before beginning his beating. Benny fucks up massively and fools around in the wrong direction, prompting Phil to beat the shit out of him while demanding for Tony B's location, with no luck. Tony meets Benny and the other guys in the hospital the next day, with Vito noting that he has a fractured skull, and Tony tries awkwardly making Benny's situation better in front of his not particularly happy crew, who tell each other after Tony leaves that they want to crack some skulls over in New York. Tony walks into Junior ordering a fruit basket for his lawyer, who recently had a stroke, and says that this is going to cause his retrial to be postponed. Tony changes the subject to Phil and John's conflict with New Jersey, asking Junior what he should do since Phil is close to killing one of his guys over this debacle. But Junior has nothing good to offer except gibberish as Tony tells him to forget it. Probably not a difficult task. Hey, it's true, I'm just saying. Tony realizes that he's got basically nobody to talk with about this except himself. And Tony's crew talks about how hard Phil is screwing them over and speculates that Tony already knows where Tony B is, saying that Tony's putting more effort into protecting his family rather than his own crew members. Tony tells Melfi about his recurring dream with his old high school coach, telling her about how the coach thought Tony was special and how AJ's coach is starting to prefer one of the other kids more. And Melfi asks how things are going with Tony B, which Tony says he can't talk about right now. Tony says he cares about Tony B very much, as Melfi points out that his feelings stem greatly from the guilt he felt for missing out on the robbery, saying that Tony's going all the way back to square one and telling him to own his feelings. And Tony continues not to give any information on Tony B, claiming it to be his mess. AJ runs a party with his friends and confronts people that he believes to be bringing in fake cups to avoid paying admission. And one of his friends gets into a fight with this guy while Tony sits around the bingo miserable. He contemplates talking to Johnny over the phone but hangs up in the last second. And he goes over to Paulie's place due to Silvio's comments about him not approving his latest moves as boss. However, instead of lecturing Paulie about Tony not being respected, Tony is instead shocked to realize that Paulie kept a painting of him and Pyomai. And Tony hilariously gets angry at Paulie for this, while Paulie says that the picture made him emotional. He says that he figured there wouldn't be a problem due to Tony never coming to his house, as Tony claims that he doesn't come due to government surveillance. And Tony continues asking if Paulie's making fun of him with this painting, while Paulie insists that he isn't, saying that he had the painting retouched so that it could better represent Tony's best qualities as a general or a leader.
That's not a lawn jockey. That's a general.
What general? Who?
It's not a real general from history. It's you.
Tony is still pissed about the painting and forcefully takes it outside to dump it in the trash. But as he looks at it more, he begins to think about what Paulie said. He looks at the sword, the clenched fist, and the confident expression, and is given the inspiration to act like a true leader and keep his troops out of trouble. The only reason Phil is acting so aggressive toward Tony's crew right now is because he wants Tony B and he wants him dead. If Tony B is already dead, then there's no need for them to continue the witch hunt. You see where I'm going with this? Tony looks into Tony B's literal dead-eyed expression before calling Johnny at a payphone and giving him the location of Tony B. Before we move on, now that Tony B's story is basically over, I want to talk about Tony B and just how unfortunately underwhelming his character was. Now, I want to clarify, I don't think Tony B was a bad character, far from it. I really enjoyed his chemistry with all the other Mafia members, and I especially enjoyed just how normal he felt compared to everyone else. It would have been really interesting to see him go on other misadventures with the other crew members, a la Pine Barrens, or hell, even something like a subplot for have the episode with one of the other characters. Anything, really. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but the point I'm trying to make here is this. Tony B is far and away one of the weakest major Sopranos characters, not because of the material he was given, but rather the material that he wasn't given. It's not like he's pushed to the sidelines or anything. He's given a huge role in season 5 and ends up kickstarting the conflict that would haunt Tony and his crew throughout season 6. The issue, though, is that he feels less like an actual character who's given things to do other than drive the season's main conflict, and more as a force that drives the season's main conflict. I really enjoyed his material in the first half of the season, where he's getting reacquainted with the family and trying his best to resist the temptations and stay away from the game, but once he eventually caves in, it feels like the show just puts his character on autopilot and only involves him when the writers need someone to cause some important conflict. We're given these very brief glances into his motivations as a character and what makes him tick, but those moments are few and far between. Like, we're told that he has issues with his daughter, and while you'd think that would come into play later in the story, it's instead brushed off entirely. The only real fleshing out we get from it is that great scene of one of the twins telling Tony B that he doesn't want to live in their house anymore, reminding Tony B of his daughter running away from home. It's a great moment, but the problem is that it's basically one of the only moments, along with a scene of him getting uncomfortable watching Benno and Tony be happy together. Tony B's underutilization and underdevelopment as a character caused a lot of what should be great moments to lose a lot of luster in retrospect. The show insists to the audience constantly that the reason Tony B went out and murdered the Leotardos was because of his anger and that he's prone to rage. The problem with this, though, is that I just don't believe it! Outside of his outburst with Boss Kim, along with him attacking the Leotardos, obviously, there were hardly any moments throughout this season where Tony B gets angry at random people and lashes out at them. In fact, I would argue that he's the opposite. Even when his kids unknowingly touched a nerve in the aforementioned "I don't want to live here" scene, it's not like Tony B yells at his kids or slaps them or whatever. He just takes away their Game Boys like a rational parent. Compare that to someone like Tony, who gets pissed off at the slightest inconvenience and yells and swears and is generally unpleasant to be around. The Sopranos makes its characters angry all the time. You think this would have been a slam dunk for the show to make Tony B pissed off. But they instead show restraint on his character despite being one of the only characters this season to lash out in this severe of a fashion. I'm not saying it's abnormal for his character to act out like this per se, but what I'm saying is that it's nowhere near as consistent as literally any other character in the show. Compare Tony B to someone like Ralphie, an objectively much better character. Every season of The Sopranos has Tony dealing with some main asshole for the majority of it. In season 1, it's Uncle Junior and Livia. In season 2, it's Richie Aprile. And in seasons 3 and 4, for the most part, it's Ralphie. Ralphie is one of the most well-realized antagonists in all of The Sopranos because of how much we get to know about him, or rather, what we have to know about him. We're given a ton of time dedicated to his weird sexual urges, his psychotic behavior towards women and people in general, his constant poking and prodding and ball breaking of every crew member around him. We're even left with a mystery of whether or not he was the one who killed Pyomai. When you think of Ralphie, you have a very good image in your mind of who he is, what he's about, and why that's a bad thing. He is an excellently written character. Now try imagining Tony B in your mind. Do you have a good idea of who he is as a character? He massages people. And he killed Billy, that's a big one. And, he massages people. Tony B transforms into the main source of conflict Tony has to deal with this season due to his unpredictable decision-making, but his impact as a character can barely be felt, outside of him being the straw that broke Phil's back and turning him into a fucking deranged psycho. There were so many opportunities for him to develop as a character this season, like the episode where he goes up to the barn with Chris. There was such a great opportunity here for Chris and Tony B to conflict with each other and flesh out their dynamic, but instead of making something interesting, they basically just wrap up the conflict instantly and have Tony go over to the barn since Tony is like one of the only characters that does anything with Tony B. It's like the writers were afraid to do anything with this character, or worse, they had no idea what to do, which is very out of character for this show, given just how incredible it is at writing and developing extremely memorable characters. When building up to the moment Tony B went rogue, they tried to make up for Tony B's lack of development by gifting us with this really long dream sequence of Tony worrying about Tony B. And while it was a great dream sequence, in regards to Tony B's character, I don't think it was really enough for the writers to be like, alright, release the Kraken, have him kill Billy. The only real development we get from Tony B is his relationship to Tony and Tony's guilt for not joining the robbery years back. But it gets to a point that it feels like that's the only thing going on with Tony B throughout this season. His underutilization is so tragic because his character isn't badly written or performed or anything. I love Steve Buscemi. I would have loved nothing more than for Tony B to become a regular in the crew and act as a cooler head when things get tricky. I would have loved to see him try to prove everyone's perceptions of him wrong and watch him become this capable leader, or even better, send him down the road to someone like Davey Scatino and have him fall apart over the course of the season. It kind of felt like the show was leaning that direction anyway, given the fact that we get a lot of time dedicated to Tony B studying to become a licensed massage therapist, and watching him get back into the game and slowly deteriorate over time would have been great to see. What do we get instead? Nothing. Like I've mentioned already, at points during the show, it feels like he only exists to drive the story along in the way the writers want to. Like with the moment when Tony B stopped Chris from getting clipped and took them to a doctor to prove that no blowjobs were exchanged. It's like, okay, cool, Tony B is a smart guy. Are we going to see more of this from his character? I'd love to see him contribute more to Tony's crew. Nope, nothing after that. And now apparently the smartest guy in the crew who knows an ungodly amount about the human body is fucking everything up in the most rash and unbelievable way possible. Is he a calm, collected, rational guy who has an IQ of 158? Or is he a no fucks given vigilante because he can't have both? These moments where Tony B does something important as a character lack so much impact due to his lack of development. He's apparently pissed off about Angelo being killed, but like, how the fuck were we supposed to know that? The show gives us barely any information about this, other than a 1-minute conversation between the two of them before Angelo was killed, and also like 2 lines earlier in the season saying that they were best buddies in prison. That's right, 2 lines. I'm barely exaggerating. Man, I know so much about these two. So when Tony B goes nuts and the murder happens, it's like, oh, he gave a shit? I didn't know he gave a shit. The emotional connection between Angelo and Tony B is not well established or utilized in the story, leading to Tony B's wild outburst feeling far less justified than the writers were probably intending. I wish Tony B had more to do in this show because I honestly believe he could have been one of the show's most memorable and beloved characters. He had the potential to be something so much more interesting and compelling, but the reason why I think a lot of his development was pushed to the side was because, to be frank, this season is fucking stuffed. We were fresh off the heels of one of the show's best episodes, and it's not like the show can just ignore the fact that Tony and Carm are separating. You've also got the continuing conflict with the New York crew, all the other members that got released out of prison, Adriana and her fallout with the FBI, Tony's interpersonal conflict with his cousin, hell, all Tony's conflict in general. Chris sobering up, Chris not sobering up. I can keep going, but you get the point. There was a boatload of stuff to deal with this season, a lot of it executed much better than Tony B's character, and while a lot of the good stuff this season was more than able to make up for it, Tony B's character still remains a blemish on an otherwise fantastic show. This is just my opinion though. Maybe Tony B's character is actually brilliant and I just don't understand. The word of the day is perspective. Anyways, back to the episode. Phil fools around up to the address and notices Tony B's body next to the door. And Tony heads to the Bing the next day, with Silvio telling Tony that Johnny was trying to call him earlier and that he sounded pissed. And the guys awkwardly sit around the place while Silvio closes up a safe, trying not to address the elephant in the room. Later, Johnny calls Tony and the doctor telling him that Phil still ain't happy, with Tony telling Johnny that they need to put this all behind them and offering to give Phil money so he'll shut the fuck up. Tony tracks down Chris and tells him to go up to Uncle Pat's farm to pick up and bury Tony B's body. And he switches the topic to Adriana, with Chris telling Tony that she very rarely witnessed any crimes other than taking her along to pick up collections of the Esplanade, and swears that he never mentioned anything about Ralphie's murder or the Bevilacqua hit. Before Tony leaves, he makes sure that Chris isn't sneaking any H into his system as Chris declares that he's clean. And Tony and Chris rationalize Adriana's murder by calling her a and hugging. AJ looks at porn on his product placement as Carm tells him to work on his goddamn college application, telling AJ that he's gonna be cooked if he doesn't turn it in on time.
Those applications are late, you are cooked. It's that simple.
Carm and Tony tell AJ that they're gonna freeze his allowance until he finishes his applications, and AJ says that's okay since he earned $300 from holding that party earlier, leaving Carm and Tony defeated once again. The next day, Tony fools around over to Johnny's place for the sit-down, which is actually more of a stand-up, and Johnny smokes a cigarette since nicotine is an addictive substance, while Tony tells Johnny that any and all punishment has been doled out already, and that Phil needs to realize that the most important thing to focus on right now is feeding their families rather than going berserk and killing everyone. He demands Johnny to get this through Phil's head and points out that this all started when Johnny had Lorraine killed, saying that Johnny just wants to become a rich asshole and demanding him to just offer a percentage of Tony B's casino to Phil so that he'll be happy.
Read his price, and that's it. I don't want to hear nothing else.
Oh, you don't?
I paid enough, John. I paid a lot.
After another successful business strategy on Tony's part, Johnny finally bends the knee and agrees to this deal. And just when things finally seem to be settling down between both families, the FBI decides to make a little surprise appearance at the Sacramone Manor.
I don't know. Fucking Christ.
Tony manages to get away from the scene while Johnny is not so lucky. And Tony drops his gun in the snow, wandering around through the woods trying to ditch any cops following him. He finds a moment to settle down and calls his lawyer, informing him that Johnny Sack's been pinched, while his lawyer tells him that Jimmy Petriel was a rat and had the full Petriel crew taken in, including Johnny. Tony worries since he left his car parked at Johnny's as his lawyer reassures him that he's got nothing to worry about. And Tony finally arrives home, crawling through the sticks in this weirdly slowed down shot into his backyard. He knocks on the backyard door until Carm greets him inside, asking what the hell happened to him as the show fades to black, ending the episode. Another great episode to close off season 5. I cannot get enough of the fact that the stupid Napoleon painting of Tony actually came back as a legitimately important plot point, on top of the scene being hilarious overall. I really enjoyed how the first half of this episode dealt with Tony's complicated thoughts regarding Tony B and how he was essentially left on his lonesome to fix this conflict, unable to talk to someone with more experience dealing with difficult choices like Melfi or even Junior. He knew that Tony B was going to end up dead in the end, but I don't think he could really bring himself to accept this until the painting reminded him that a leader must do what he can to protect his crew, which he did. I love all the conflict between the crews in this episode, and my favorite scene of the episode has to be the final meeting between Johnny and Tony, parlayed into Tony and Johnny trying to run away from the police. It's this great mix of serious business drama stuff and haha funny man go down. Also, it's weird how the cops just emerged from the black void during this scene, even though the rest of the house was lit. Boy, I sure hope somebody got fired for that blunder. Tony walking around through the woods was also a great moment. You know what? The whole last 10 minutes of this episode is excellent. To end off season 5 of The Sopranos, I am feeling a strong S tier. A great end to a great season. Season 5 of The Sopranos, a season of the show that suffers in some areas but absolutely excels in others. The quality was very consistent throughout, even if I was expecting In Camelot to be kind of a stinker, which, surprisingly enough, it wasn't. Yes, I did place it 4 episodes above A More Fu. What are you gonna do about it, huh? Complain? I've seen what makes you cheer. A ton of very important developments in this show are made in this season, from Tony and Carmela's fluctuating marriage status to Phil's increasingly bloodthirsty attitude, from Adriana getting the boot to that animal Blundetto getting the boot, and I'm very excited to cover what's gonna go down next in the Soprano crew, and also the New York crew, also the family and stuff. Will season 6 prove to be better than season 5? We'll just have to wait and see. Oh, by the way, for the season 6 tier list, I'm going to be splitting it up into 2 separate videos due to the fact that this season has 21 episodes rather than its usual 13. And since 21 is a wee bit too much for me to handle all at once, for my sake, I'm going to split up the workload. While I'm working on those, go check out the show yourself if you somehow haven't already. The show is worth your time anyway, so why not? Alright, that's about going to do it for this video. Make sure to fuck that like button and subscribe and all that. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all in season 6. Part 1. Take care.